You ever wonder why smart people make dumb decisions? Why self-awareness is so rare, even in people who talk about it all the time? It's not because they're bad people. It's because the ego is sneaky. It doesn't yell. It whispers. It tells you you're right, you're good, you're above all this, even when you're not. This video, it's not about judging others. It's about exposing the invisible traps our own egos build around us, the ones that make us defensive, blind, overconfident, or quietly self-sabotaging, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's get into the traps we all fall into without even realizing it. But before that, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected, each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel RestWise, and join the journey. Dunning Kruger effect. You ever notice how the loudest person in the room is usually the least qualified to be talking? It's not just annoying, it's psychological. There's actually a name for it, and it's one of the most dangerous ego traps out there. It's called the Dunning Kruger effect, and it doesn't just affect them. It affects all of us, whether we know it or not. It works like this. The less someone knows, the more confident they are. Not because they're arrogant by nature, but because they literally don't know what they don't know. Their blind spots are invisible to them, so they think they've mastered something when in reality they've barely scratched the surface. And the scariest part, it feels like certainty. It feels like they're right. It feels like truth. That's the trap. Think about the first time you learned a new skill. Maybe you watched a few tutorials, read a couple articles, picked up the basics. Suddenly, it feels like you've figured it out. You start talking about it with confidence, maybe even giving advice. But then, later, you go deeper, and you realize how complex it really is. You hit that wall. And now, instead of confidence, you feel hesitation, doubt, humility. Not because you've gotten worse, but because you've finally seen the full picture. That moment, that shift from "I got this" to "wait, this is bigger than I thought." That's the escape route from the Dunning-Kruger trap. But most people never get there. They stay stuck in that early burst of confidence. And once that version of themselves starts getting validation from friends, social media, coworkers, the illusion locks in. They become impossible to teach. Because in their mind, they already know. This isn't just theory. It's been tested. In one study, researchers asked people to take logic tests, grammar quizzes, even evaluate jokes. Then they asked each person how well they thought they did. The ones who scored the lowest were the most confident about their performance. They were completely unaware of how badly they missed the mark. But here's what really messes with your head. The top performers actually underestimated themselves. They assumed everyone else was just as competent. They thought their high score was average. That's what makes the Dunning-Kruger effect so twisted. It punishes self-awareness and rewards ignorance wrapped in confidence. And we see this play out everywhere. The fake expert who dominates a conversation. The social media influencer preaching life advice after reading one book. The coworker who corrects you with the wrong answer and walks away proud. The trap isn't just personal, it's cultural. We live in a world that celebrates boldness more than truth. So how do you fight back? You start by realizing this can happen to you. This isn't about pointing fingers. This is about catching yourself in the act. That moment when you feel overly certain, when you find yourself talking louder, defending harder, refusing to consider another perspective. That's your red flag. That's when it's time to ask yourself, do I really know this, or do I just think I do? The real experts, they're cautious. They say things like it depends or here's what we know so far. Not because they're unsure, but because they understand the weight of complexity. They've been humbled by the depth of the subject, and that humility isn't weakness. It's proof of growth. The danger of the Dunning Kruger effect isn't just that it makes you wrong. It's that it feels so right. It gives you a false sense of competence, and if no one challenges it, you'll keep operating from a place of ignorance. You'll stop learning. You'll stop listening. And worst of all, you'll believe your own hype. It's uncomfortable to admit you might not know as much as you think. But that discomfort, that's where the growth happens. If you can sit in that space, where you're no longer blindly confident, but not yet an expert, that's the zone that leads to mastery. It's frustrating. It's slow. But it's real, and it's rare. Most people will never leave that first peak of overconfidence. They'll stay stuck on the beginner's high, mistaking it for expertise, and when someone tries to show them the deeper levels, they resist. Because ego hates being corrected. Ego wants to be right, not better. So here's the challenge. Next time you feel certain, pause. Don't shut down. Don't double down. Just ask yourself, am I standing on solid ground, or am I just too early in the process to see the cracks? That question alone can pull you out of the trap, and if you can do that consistently, you'll start separating yourself from 90% of people who confuse confidence for truth. And if you're someone who already sees how much you don't know, if you're second, guessing yourself while others are bluffing their way through, don't mistake that for weakness. That's the beginning of real wisdom. It means you've passed the first test. You're not trapped by your ego. You're paying attention. The Dunning Kruger effect isn't something you beat once. It's something you keep checking for. Like a blind spot in your mirror. The moment you stop looking for it, that's when it gets you. The need to be right trap. You ever argue with someone and halfway through realize it's not even about the point anymore. You forgot what started it. Now it's just about winning. Proving you're right. That moment right there. That's not logic anymore. That's ego. This is one of the most toxic traps, and most people are deep in it without even realizing. The need to be right. Not the desire, not the preference. The need. As in, if I'm not right, something in me feels threatened. Like I lose something by being wrong. Like my value, my identity, my intelligence. It's all on the line. Every conversation becomes a battlefield. Every disagreement feels like a personal attack. You can't even hear the other person. You're just waiting for your turn to fire back. But here's the truth. Being wrong doesn't hurt you. Needing to be right does. Because when being right becomes your mission, your brain stops looking for truth and starts looking for ammunition. And it's sneaky, because it feels like you're being smart. It feels like you're defending what's true. But what you're actually defending, is your ego. There's this psychological bias called confirmation bias. Your brain will automatically seek out info that supports what you already believe and reject anything that challenges it. Not because it's accurate, just because it feels safer. It protects your current worldview, even if that worldview is completely off. So instead of growing, you double down. Instead of learning, you argue. You build walls. You choose pride over progress. And here's the worst part. The more intelligent you are, the better you are at justifying your own beliefs. So smart people are actually more vulnerable to this trap because they can talk their way around anything. They can make any wrong idea sound right. That's not wisdom. That's self-sabotage disguised as intellect. Think about how many relationships get destroyed over this. Two people who care about each other, but one of them just cannot admit when they're wrong. Apologies get stuck in their throat. Even when they know they messed up, they twist the facts, flip the blame, or walk away like nothing happened. Not because they don't care, but because the need to be right is stronger than the need to connect. And you've probably done it too. We all have. Maybe not out loud, maybe just in your head. That little voice that says, I know I'm right, and they just don't get it. That feeling of satisfaction when someone finally says, okay, you were right. Feels good, right? But what did it cost? Did you actually connect? Did you learn anything? Or did you just win a tiny battle that made the war even worse? Because being right doesn't always mean you're wise. And giving up being right doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it takes more strength to listen than to argue. Sometimes letting someone else finish their thought without jumping in is the most powerful move you can make. Not because they're right, but because you're secure enough to not need to be. Here's the thing. If your self-worth is tied to being right, then being wrong will always feel like death. You'll avoid it at all costs, even if it means ignoring truth, even if it means pushing people away, even if it means living in a carefully constructed illusion where you're always the smartest person in the room. But the price you pay for that illusion is massive. You stop evolving. You stop connecting. You start believing your own story. And at some point, that story turns into a cage. Now here's the part that might sting. The need to be right often comes from insecurity, not confidence. It comes from not knowing who you are without your opinions. So you cling to them. You argue not to grow, but to protect your identity. You become so focused on defending your point that you forget to ask, what if they're right? What if I'm missing something? What if being wrong could actually teach me something I didn't know before? And the people who escape this trap, they're not the ones who never get into debates. They're the ones who stay open inside the debate. They're curious. They ask real questions. They're not just listening for flaws. They're listening for truth, even if it contradicts them, especially if it contradicts them. That's emotional maturity. That's intellectual humility. And it's rare, because most people would rather be right than be free. So the next time you feel that urge, that itch to correct someone, to prove your point, to hit back with a fact that makes you look smart, just pause. Ask yourself what the cost of being right is in that moment. Ask yourself what it would feel like to let go. Not to give up, not to roll over, but to release that ego need and actually engage like a human, not a debate robot. Because the people who grow the fastest are not the ones who are always right. They're the ones who are willing to be wrong and strong enough to admit it. Overconfidence bias. You ever notice how someone will speak with absolute certainty about something they barely understand? Not just confidence, overconfidence. Like they've already got the answers and the manual and the solution all wrapped up. And meanwhile, the people who've actually spent years studying the same topic are sitting back like, Hold up. It's not that simple. That's not just annoying. It's dangerous. That is the overconfidence bias. And it is one of the most seductive ego traps out there because it hides in plain sight. It doesn't feel like bias. It feels like control. It feels like power. And that's why so many people fall straight into it. Here's the scary part. Overconfidence feels exactly like competence. That's why it's so tricky. You feel sharp, focused, certain. You think you've got it all figured out. But what you don't realize is your brain is skipping steps. It's filling in blanks. It's telling you, yeah, you can handle this, when in reality, you're standing on half-built knowledge and pure adrenaline. You know where this shows up constantly? Risk. People taking risks way beyond their actual ability. Investors throwing money into stocks they barely understand. Entrepreneurs launching businesses without research. Drivers speeding because they think they have amazing reflexes. It's not always arrogance. Sometimes it's just a deep belief that nothing will go wrong. That belief is the trap. Your brain does this thing. It overestimates how good you are at predicting outcomes. It makes you feel like you're special, like you're immune to the usual failures. You see this in people who start a new habit and assume they'll never break it. Or people who get a little bit of praise and suddenly think they're the next big thing. The pattern is always the same. They overestimate their abilities. They underestimate the difficulty. And when things go wrong, they're shocked, confused, sometimes even angry, because their expectations weren't grounded in reality. They were inflated by ego. And here's the twist. Most people who are caught in overconfidence bias don't look insecure. They look bold, decisive, leaders. But underneath all that certainty is usually one thing: fear of being seen as average. That's the emotional driver. The need to prove something, to stand out, to matter. So they posture, they commit too fast, they speak too strongly, and eventually the illusion breaks. Now, here's how this gets worse. The world rewards overconfidence. The job goes to the person who acts most sure of themselves. The client picks the loudest pitch. The audience follows the boldest voice, even if the substance is weak. So what does that teach us? That being right matters less than sounding sure. And that feeds the bias even more. You see this on social media every day. Someone posts advice, dead wrong, no nuance, but full of swagger. And it spreads like wildfire. Why? Because confidence is magnetic. It makes people feel safe. It gives them something to believe. And most people won't fact-check what makes them feel good. They'll just follow it. That's how overconfidence becomes contagious. But here's the cost. When reality finally hits, it hits hard. That business fails. That relationship collapses. That decision backfires. And now, the person who was so certain is scrambling. They weren't prepared for consequences because they never thought they were wrong. And in that moment, all that confidence they built their identity on turns into shame. That fall, it's brutal and avoidable. Because real strength is not in pretending to know everything. It's in knowing the limits of what you know. Being confident is fine. But overconfidence, that's ego in disguise. It's not a sign of mastery. It's a mask. One that hides your blind spots until they blow up in your face. So how do you fight it? You stop confusing certainty with accuracy. You start checking your own hype. You ask questions like, do I really know what I'm talking about? Or am I assuming things? Am I taking this risk because it's smart, or because I feel lucky? What's the downside I'm ignoring? People who avoid the overconfidence trap are not timid. They're precise. They know where they shine and where they need help. They gather feedback. They stress test their assumptions. They don't fall in love with being right. They fall in love with getting it right. And when you operate like that, you win long term. Because your decisions aren't based on ego. They're based on clarity. You're not bluffing your way through life. You're actually learning. And that makes you dangerous in the best possible way. So next time that voice in your head says, "Yeah, I got this," pause for a second. Double check. Not because you doubt yourself, but because you respect the consequences. Because you care about the outcome more than the image. That's not playing small, that's playing smart. Overconfidence bias will make you feel like a genius until the world reminds you you're not. Avoiding that moment doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. So check the ego, keep the edge, and lead with truth, not illusion. The "I wouldn't fall for that trap" you ever hear about some scam, or cult, or social experiment. And your first reaction is something like, "I wouldn't fall for that." It hits instantly, like a reflex. Like your brain just needs to prove to itself that you're smarter than that. You see the headline, and before you even understand what happened, your ego has already decided, "Yeah, that would never be me." That's the trap. The "I wouldn't fall for that" trap is one of the most dangerous because it doesn't just close your mind. It blinds you. It shuts off your ability to understand how people actually get manipulated, tricked, or influenced. You stop learning. You stop observing, because in your mind, you're above it. But that assumption, that's exactly what makes you vulnerable. See, most people think falling for something means you're stupid, or gullible, or weak. But that's not true. Some of the most intelligent, educated people have fallen for scams, or propaganda, or toxic relationships. Not because they were dumb, but because they were human. Humans are wired to believe what feels familiar, what matches their worldview, and especially what validates their emotions. And when you combine that with strong social pressure, isolation, fear, urgency, suddenly you're not making logical decisions anymore. You're reacting, trying to stay safe, trying to belong, trying to make sense of chaos. And here's what makes this even darker. The people who are most certain they would never fall for it are often the first to go under. Because they don't see the red flags. They don't question themselves. They don't pause to ask, "Wait, could this be happening to me?" The "I wouldn't fall for that" trap turns your ego into armor. It feels protective, but what it really does is seal you off from insight. It makes you feel superior to people who were fooled. So instead of studying what happened, you judge them. You laugh at them. You distance yourself. But here's the thing. The brain loves shortcuts. It wants to believe the simplest version of a story. And if your shortcut is always, "Yeah, I'm too smart for that," then you'll miss the deeper game being played. You ever wonder why cults don't usually recruit the visibly broken or desperate? They go after people with potential, people with confidence, people with ambition, because those people are easier to flatter, easier to manipulate. All you have to do is tell them they're chosen, that they're part of the enlightened few, and boom, they're in. The trap is disguised as a compliment, and the ego eats it up. Same thing with scams. You're not targeted because you're dumb. You're targeted because you think you're not. And when you get that email or message or too good to be true deal, your guard isn't up. Because your ego already whispered, "That's for other people, not me." And it's not just cults or scams. This shows up in everyday life. You see someone stuck in a toxic relationship and think, I'd never stay with someone like that. You see someone manipulated by a politician and say, how can they be so blind? But the reality is, we're all blind to something. Everyone has a vulnerability. Everyone has a pressure point. And it's the people who think they're immune who get hit the hardest. There's this idea in psychology called the bias blind spot. It means you can see how other people are biased, but you struggle to see it in yourself. And the more confident you are in your own objectivity, the more likely you are to fall for something. Because you've stopped checking yourself. You've stopped questioning your reactions. You trust your gut so much that you never ask who trained it. So what's the move? Humility. Not the fake kind where you say, oh, I'm just lucky or I'm nothing special. No. Real humility. The kind that says I'm smart and I'm still human. I know a lot and I can still be fooled. I've done the work, but I'm never done learning. That mindset keeps you alert, open, aware. It allows you to study people who fell for things without mocking them, to look at the mechanism instead of the outcome, to understand how the brain gets hijacked instead of pretending yours never could. And in doing that, you actually build real protection, not ego armor, but awareness, because the truth is, anyone can fall. The difference is, will you see it coming? Will you catch the pattern before it grips you? Or will you be too busy proving how awake you are to realize you're dreaming? The trap isn't just in falling. The trap is in believing you're above falling. And when you believe that, you stop evolving. You stop paying attention. You live in this illusion of clarity while someone else quietly nudges your decisions, shapes your beliefs, pulls your strings, and you never even notice because you were sure it couldn't happen to you. So next time you see someone fall for something, instead of judging, get curious. Ask how it worked. What made them vulnerable? What they were chasing? What they were afraid of? And then ask, do I have that in me too? Because you probably do. We all do. The question is, will you see it before it sees you? The smartest in the room trap. You know what's funny? Being the smartest person in the room feels like a compliment. You hear someone say it, and you think, wow, must be nice. But if that's true, if you really are the smartest person in the room, that's not a flex. That's a warning. Because here's the trap. Once you believe you're the smartest in the room, you stop learning. You stop listening. You stop stretching. You build a throne out of your own ideas and sit there like a king while the world moves on without you. Now let's get one thing clear. Intelligence is not the problem. Being sharp, insightful, quick, that's a gift. The trap is when your intelligence becomes your identity. When being right becomes more important than discovering truth. When being the best becomes more important than being better. That's when growth ends and ego begins. This trap doesn't start loud. It starts subtle. You're in a meeting and someone says something off. You correct them. People nod. You feel that little hit, that spark of superiority. Then it happens again, and again. And over time, you start expecting to be the sharpest one there. So now you listen with one ear and argue with the other. You don't ask questions. You wait for your turn to speak. Not because you're evil, because you're addicted to being the answer instead of seeking it. And it gets worse. You start surrounding yourself with people who reinforce that identity. People who won't challenge you. People who play small around you. because that feels safe. That feels good. But the moment you're the smartest one in your circle, you've stopped evolving. And that comfort zone, it's not a sign of success. It's a ceiling disguised as a crown. Here's where it gets dangerous. You think you're growing because you're busy, because you're in charge, because people respect you. But what you're actually doing is performing intelligence. You're curating your image. You're playing the part of the brilliant thinker, the problem solver, the one who always knows what to do. But deep down, your ego is starving. It's terrified of being wrong, of being outshined, of being humbled. So you start filtering out anything that threatens your status. You reject criticism. You avoid complexity. You simplify the world into right and wrong, smart and dumb, me and them. But real intelligence is never that black and white. And the moment you stop engaging with complexity, you're no longer the smartest person in the room. You're just the loudest. Think about the people you admire most, not the ones with big titles or big platforms, but the ones who always seem sharp, curious, dangerous in a good way. Chances are, they're not chasing the title of smartest. They're chasing truth. They're humble enough to learn, brave enough to change, and self-aware enough to know that their mind is a tool, not a trophy. There's a reason elite performers hire coaches. There's a reason CEOs have advisors. It's not because they're weak. It's because they know they have blind spots. They've been burned by their own brilliance enough times to realize intelligence without humility is a liability. The irony is, the moment you stop trying to be the smartest, you actually start getting smarter. Because now you're open. You're listening to people who see things you don't. You're asking questions you were too proud to ask before. You're stepping into rooms where you aren't the most impressive. And instead of shrinking, you rise. And the world can feel that. People respect someone who's sharp and humble, who can teach and still be taught, who can lead and still be challenged. That's real power. That's the kind of person you want to be. Not the know-it-all who's always one step ahead of the conversation, but the one who's 5 steps deep into it. But if your identity is built on being the smartest, it's going to hurt when someone walks in and out, thinks you. When they have better ideas. When they're younger, faster, fresher. And trust me, they will come. And if you're not ready, if your self-worth is tied to being the sharpest in the room, you'll feel attacked. You'll get defensive. You'll sabotage the people you should be learning from, just to protect a title that never actually meant anything. Because the truth is, being the smartest in the room is not a title you earn. It's a signal that it might be time to find a new room. One that stretches you. One that humbles you. One that sharpens your mind by making you feel uncomfortable again. So next time you catch yourself feeling a little too certain, a little too above the conversation, pause. Ask yourself, what room am I in? Am I growing? Am I being challenged? Or am I just being admired? Because admiration might feel good, but challenge is what makes you dangerous. Don't fall for the trap. The I'm not biased bias. So be honest for a second. If someone asked you, do you think you're biased, what would you say? Probably something like, not really. Maybe a little. But I try to be fair. I try to stay logical. That answer right there. That's the trap. The second you believe you're unbiased is the moment you become blind to how much your brain is bending reality. And it's not just that you're biased. It's that your bias convinces you you're not. That's the I'm not biased bias. And it is one of the most dangerous tricks your ego ever plays on you. Most people think bias looks like some loud, extreme opinion, some aggressive political rant or conspiracy theory. But real bias, it whispers. It hides inside your logic. It shows up when you feel calm, rational, above the chaos. You watch someone get emotional and you think, wow, they're so irrational. But not me. I'm seeing this clearly. I'm neutral. I'm balanced. I've got the facts. What you don't realize is that everybody thinks that. Even the people you think are totally delusional. Yeah. They feel just as confident in their logic as you do. That's how deep this goes. The human brain was never built to be neutral. It was built to survive, to predict danger, to simplify things quickly, which means it loves certainty. It loves clean stories. It loves anything that reinforces your identity and protects your worldview. That's why when someone gives you new information that challenges you, it doesn't feel neutral. It feels threatening. It feels like an attack. So your brain does what it's trained to do. It filters. It justifies. It twists. And the worst part is, you don't even notice it. Because the filter doesn't feel like a filter. It feels like truth. And the more you believe you're unbiased, the more dangerous your thinking becomes. Because now, any opinion you hold feels like fact. Any belief you defend feels like virtue. Any person who disagrees with you must be wrong, or uneducated, or emotional. You've built a mental echo chamber, not out of ignorance, but out of certainty. That's what makes this trap so hard to see. You're not being arrogant. You're just being sure. But that false clarity, that's exactly what blocks real understanding. Let me give you an example. Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was political or personal or just some stupid debate online. You probably remember what you said, how logical you were, how unreasonable they were. But did you stop at any point and ask yourself, wait, what if I'm the one missing something here? Probably not. Because the brain doesn't default to doubt. It defaults to defense. And every time you double down, every time you dismiss the other side without actually considering it, that I'm not biased, bias tightens its grip. Now here's the kicker. Smart people are often the worst offenders. Because the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing. You can make any belief sound intelligent. You can explain your way through any contradiction. You can find data that supports whatever you already think. So you don't feel biased. You feel well-researched. You feel responsible. But all you're really doing is armoring your ego with facts. And this isn't just about debates or arguments. It shows up in relationships, in leadership, in everyday decisions. You interpret tone through your own emotional state. You assume intentions based on past experiences. You treat gut reactions like they're objective insights. And then you build narratives around those assumptions. All while telling yourself, I'm just calling it like I see it. But what if how you see it isn't how it is? The truth is, bias isn't a flaw. It's a function. Everyone has it. The danger isn't having bias. It's pretending you don't. That's what blocks growth. That's what kills empathy. That's what keeps you stuck in cycles of miscommunication and missed opportunity. Because the more certain you are that you're seeing clearly, the less likely you are to question your own lens. So what's the fix? It's not to erase bias. That's impossible. The fix is to notice it, to pause when you feel certain and ask, where is this certainty coming from? What story am I telling myself? What am I not seeing right now? It's staying curious instead of confident, humble instead of defensive, flexible instead of fixed. Real intelligence isn't about being right. It's about being aware. It's about holding space for your own blind spots. It's about realizing that the more confident you are in your objectivity, the more likely it is that you're missing something crucial. And when you can admit that, when you can say, I am biased and I want to see it, that's when you actually start thinking clearly. So next time your mind says I'm being fair, I'm being logical, I'm just telling the truth, pause. Ask yourself, or better yet, dare yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if my ego is painting this whole thing to make me feel right, safe, superior? That question alone could unlock a version of you that sees more, learns faster, and leads better. And if that feels uncomfortable, good. That's how you know you're getting close to something real. Credit hogging trap. You ever notice how quick people are to say, look what I did, but how quiet they get when it's time to say we? That's the credit hogging trap, and it's one of the ugliest things ego does, because it wears the mask of ambition, but underneath it's fear. Fear of being overlooked. Fear of being replaceable. Fear of not mattering unless you're the name people remember. And look, nobody wants to feel invisible. Nobody wants to pour their heart into something and have someone else get the applause. That stings, but somewhere along the way, ego flips the script. It stops being about contributing and starts being about controlling the narrative, about making sure everyone knows just how much of the success came from you. And that's where it gets dangerous. Because once you start chasing recognition over impact, everything shifts. Suddenly, you're not collaborating, you're competing. Even with your own team. You listen just enough to make it look like you're being supportive, but really you're scanning for the moment where your idea can take the spotlight. You offer help, but only if you know it'll come back to boost your name. And worst of all, when something goes right, your first instinct isn't to celebrate. It's to make sure no one else gets more credit than you. That is not leadership. That is insecurity dressed up as drive. And the trap. It works. For a while. You get noticed. People applaud you. You build a reputation for being the one who delivers. But here's what they don't tell you. The more you hog the credit, the less people want to build with you. They stop sharing ideas around you. They stop trusting you. They smile in meetings but start rooting against you in silence. Because deep down they know, if this person wins, they're taking all of us with them. And then pretending they got there alone. And that right there is how ego kills momentum. Because no matter how talented you are, you will never outpace the power of a truly aligned team. You might think you're the star, but if the people around you don't feel seen, don't feel valued, don't feel part of the win, your success has a ceiling, and it's lower than you think. Now here's what makes this trap so sneaky. It doesn't always look like bragging. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's just never mentioning the people who helped. Sometimes it's presenting a group idea like it was your breakthrough. Sometimes it's putting your name first on something that wasn't really yours to lead. And you tell yourself it's not a big deal. They'll understand. That's just how the game works. But they do notice. And over time, that quiet resentment starts to spread. One by one, the people who used to support you start pulling back. Not loudly, quietly. A little less effort, a little less trust, a little less loyalty, until eventually you look around and realize you're the only one clapping for yourself. And here's the part your ego hates. Sometimes giving credit you didn't have to give earns you more respect than taking the credit you technically earned. Because when you're generous with credit, people remember that. When you go out of your way to say, hey, I didn't do this alone, here's who made it possible, that lands different. That's what makes people want to build with you again. That's what creates legacy. It's easy to be the loudest in the room. It's harder to lift others up with you. But the people who do that, the ones who make space, who share credit, who shine the light wider instead of aiming it only at themselves, those are the ones people follow. Not out of obligation, out of belief. Because real power is quiet. It doesn't need the spotlight. It becomes the spotlight. And if you're thinking, yeah, but if I don't take credit, someone else will, then you're playing the wrong game. The goal isn't to get credit. The goal is to create something so undeniably great, so clearly collaborative, that the success speaks louder than any one name ever could. The irony is, when you stop obsessing over recognition, you actually become more recognizable. Not because you're shouting your value, but because people feel it. Because your name comes up in rooms you've never entered. Not because you demanded it, but because people want to speak it. That's the quiet power of integrity. It lasts longer than applause. So ask yourself, when this project ends, when the deal closes, when the results come in, do I want people to remember me as the one who always made sure their name was front and center? Or do I want to be the one they trust? The one they'd go to war with again? The one they'd build with? Not just because of what I do, but because of who I am when the credit's on the line. Because the people who rise the highest are usually the ones who learned early on, shine the light, and it will always come back to you. The silent superiority trap. You ever meet someone who doesn't say much, but you can feel it? That quiet air of I'm better than you. They don't brag. They don't argue. They don't need to, because in their mind, they've already decided you're beneath them. They've outgrown this conversation, this environment, this moment. That is the silent superiority trap. And it's so slippery because on the surface, it looks like maturity, like calm, like restraint. But under that quiet, ego's sitting there smiling, arms crossed, convinced it already won. This trap doesn't show up loud. It shows up in micro expressions, in dismissive nods, in half listens, in the way someone says, when they don't actually mean, And it's not always directed at others. Sometimes it's inward. A slow shift where you start believing you've figured it out. That you're operating on a higher level. That you no longer need to explain yourself, because let's be honest, most people wouldn't get it anyway. Sound familiar? You might not say it out loud, but that voice creeps in. That internal monologue that goes, I've evolved past this. I don't waste energy on these people. I know better. I think deeper. I move smarter. And it feels true, because you've worked hard. You've seen things others haven't. You've put in hours, suffered losses, earned perspective. But here's the twist. That belief that you're beyond everyone else, that you've ascended some invisible staircase of intelligence or awareness. That's ego again. It just learned to whisper instead of shout. See, superiority isn't always about showing off. Sometimes it hides behind silence, behind spiritual language, behind phrases like I just move differently. It's when you use self-restraint to feed self-importance. When you listen, not to understand, but to tolerate. When you let someone talk, and in your head, You're already placing their thoughts below yours. They're cute, but misinformed. They're trying, but they're not there yet. That quiet judgment, it feels noble, but it's not humility. It's hierarchy. The silent superiority trap tells you that your silence makes you wise, but sometimes it just makes you closed. Because when you think you've risen above everyone else, you stop learning. You stop listening with curiosity. You stop receiving feedback unless it comes from someone you already deem worthy. And you start moving through the world assuming most people are unqualified to challenge you. You know what that leads to? Isolation disguised as growth. You build invisible walls, and those walls keep you safe, but they also keep you stuck, because now only the people you respect get to shape you. Everyone else, background noise. That's how smart people end up trapped in small circles, echo chambers with just enough praise to feel confident and just enough distance to avoid real reflection. And yeah, let's be real, it's easy to feel superior sometimes, especially when you're surrounded by noise, ego, and surface-level thinking. You scroll through a few opinions online and suddenly you feel like the only person who still uses their brain. But that feeling, that quiet smugness, that is not clarity. That is comfort. That is the ego making you feel right so you don't have to go deeper. Because real wisdom doesn't isolate, it connects. It's not about rising above. It's about reaching across. It doesn't say I'm better. It says I've learned, and I'm still learning. It doesn't avoid conversations. It leans into them, even when they're messy, even when they're slow, even when the other person isn't quite there yet. Because the second you forget what it felt like to be wrong, to be lost, to be growing, you lose your grip on empathy. And without empathy, there is no wisdom, just cold clarity. And look, you don't have to dumb yourself down. You don't have to pretend every opinion deserves equal weight. Some ideas are lazy. Some thinking is shallow. But the trap is when you stop being open to surprise. When you start assuming you already know how this person thinks, how this story ends, what this conversation will or won't teach you. That's not awareness. That's spiritual laziness, so catch yourself. Next time you're in a conversation and you feel that rising wave of silent judgment, that thought of I already know where this is going. This person's not on my level. Pause. Ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? Is it really insight? Or is it identity? Is this calmness actually confidence? Or is it just distance dressed up as poise? Because maybe the highest form of intelligence isn't silence. Maybe it's presence. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything, but also doesn't need to hide behind stillness to feel superior. There's a difference between peace and pride, and when you stop confusing the two, you'll realize the most powerful people are the ones who can sit at any table, listen without a script, and still stay rooted in who they are. Not because they believe they're better, but because they're not afraid to be challenged. That's what breaks the trap. The I know this already trap. You ever hear something valuable and immediately think, yeah, I know this already. That's the trap. Right there. The I know this already trap. It's so fast you barely notice it. Your brain hears an idea, recognizes the surface, and slams the door before anything new can get in. And just like that, growth gets shut down. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right too early. This is one of ego's favorite tricks. It makes you confuse recognition with mastery. Just because you've heard something before doesn't mean you've learned it. But your mind doesn't care. It wants efficiency, familiarity. So when a lesson starts sounding like a rerun, ego leans back and says we've got this already. And that's how you miss it. Not because you didn't have access to the insight, but because you didn't have the humility to see it. And here's what makes this so dangerous. The people most likely to fall into this trap are the ones who actually are smart, experienced, self-aware, because they've read the books, watched the lectures, listened to the podcasts. They've been down the path. So when a principle or concept comes up again, they don't lean in. They mentally swipe left. Next. Got it. Move on. But what if the value isn't in the idea itself, but in the version of you hearing it now? Because every time you revisit a truth, you're a different person than the last time you heard it. You've gone through things. You've changed. So the same words can land with totally new weight if you let them. But if you're too quick to say, I already know this, you rob yourself of depth. You cut off the second layer. You walk past the diamond because you think you've seen this rock before. This trap is subtle. It hides in phrases like, oh, this again, or tell me something new, or I've already read that book. But when you peel it back, it's not boredom. It's ego. The part of you that's addicted to novelty, that wants to be stimulated, not sharpened. That wants to chase complexity instead of master simplicity. But you know what real growth looks like. Repetition, practice, getting hit with the same core truths over and over until they stop being concepts and start becoming instincts. The people who really move different, the ones with depth, with actual wisdom, they don't roll their eyes when something sounds familiar. They lean in, because they know the game is not learning something once. It's learning how to live it when it actually matters. And that's the twist no one talks about. You don't rise by knowing more. You rise by embodying more. You could memorize every strategy in the world, but if it doesn't change how you show up in real moments, stress, conflict, self-doubt, then it's just noise. And that's what the I know this already trap feeds on. It convinces you that accumulation equals transformation. That knowing the lesson is the same as having learned it. But those are different, very different. You ever see someone crash and burn on something they could explain perfectly? Yeah, they knew it, but they didn't own it. They understood the concept, but not the cost, and the cost is what wakes you up. The cost is what breaks the ego. That's what separates information from wisdom, living it. So next time you hear something old, pause. Ask yourself, am I brushing this off because I truly live it already, or because it makes me uncomfortable to hear it again? Because here's the truth. Real growth hurts a little. Not because it's new, but because it exposes where we're still inconsistent. And yeah, it's frustrating. Sometimes you think, man, I've worked so hard already. Why am I still hearing the same stuff? Why am I still struggling with something I thought I already understood? Because life is not linear. You spiral upward. You circle back to the same lessons at higher levels. Each time, you get a chance to deepen your grip, to apply it with more nuance, to see how far you've actually come, or how far you still have to go. That's not failure. That's the process. The moment you think you've got it all figured out, that's when your growth starts stalling. Not because you stopped learning, but because you stopped receiving. And the irony, the people who grow the fastest are usually the ones who act like they know the least. They approach the world with curiosity, openness. They listen like they might miss something. They don't need to feel smart in every moment because they're secure enough to keep learning, even from things they've heard 100 times. So ask yourself, when was the last time you let something familiar change you? Because maybe the wisdom you're searching for isn't in the next big idea. Maybe it's in the one you thought you already knew, finally landing in a way that sticks. The last word trap. You ever find yourself in an argument and even after it should be over, you just can't let it go? That itch to get the last word in. That need to drop one more line, one more clever comeback, one more I'm right and you're not. That is the trap. The last word trap. It's not about the conversation anymore. It's about ego trying to win. Because by the time you're fighting for the last word, you're not looking for understanding. You're looking for domination. You're not trying to solve the problem. You're trying to make the other person feel small enough that you feel big again. That's the ugly truth no one wants to admit. The last word isn't about truth. It's about power. And power, when it's fueled by ego, is always insecure. It shows up in arguments with your partner, your boss, your friends. It shows up in text threads, comment sections, Zoom calls. It's that moment when silence feels like losing, like weakness. So instead of letting it breathe, you go in for one more punch, one more sarcastic jab, one more passive-aggressive closer. Something in you just refuses to be the one who backs down. You need to be the one who ends it. And ego tells you if you don't, you lost. But did you? Or did you just pass up a moment to lead with restraint? Because here's the shock. Needing the last word is not strength. It's emotional immaturity. The mature person can pause, let it land, and walk away. Not because they're afraid, but because they're done. They've said what matters. They're not playing chess with someone who's trying to win a shouting match. They've already left the arena mentally, even if they're still standing in the room. But let's be honest, it's hard. Because sometimes you're not even talking to the other person anymore. You're talking to yourself. You're trying to convince yourself you were right. You're trying to erase the sting of being misunderstood. You're trying to make them feel what you felt. Frustrated, ignored, cornered. So ego spins the story. It says if I just say this one thing, they'll finally get it. If I land this line just right, they'll realize how wrong they were. But they won't. Because it was never about logic. It was emotional from the start. You think you're building a bridge, but you're actually digging a trench. And that's the trap. Ego doesn't want resolution. It wants a trophy. And the last word feels like a trophy. But when the smoke clears, what do you really have? A hollow victory. A silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels tense. A relationship that now carries the weight of unspoken resentment. And even if you won the conversation, you might have lost connection. And here's where it gets deeper. The last word isn't always spoken out loud. Sometimes it's a final eye roll, a condescending tone, a strategically timed silence, a text left on read. It's the need to control the exit, to control how it ends. And that need, that's insecurity dressed as certainty. Real confidence doesn't chase punctuation marks. It doesn't fight to be the exclamation point. It knows the value of walking away mid-sentence, when the sentence no longer serves growth. The strongest person in the room is not the one who speaks last. It's the one who stops speaking when nothing worth saying is left. So why do we still chase it? Because the last word gives us the illusion of closure. It makes us feel like we put a bow on the mess. But real closure doesn't come from verbal dominance. It comes from clarity, from knowing your intention was clean, from knowing you stayed true to your values, from knowing that just because someone else turned it into a game doesn't mean you had to play. And listen, this doesn't mean stay silent forever. It doesn't mean don't speak your truth, but ask yourself, are you speaking to express or are you speaking to win? Because once it becomes about winning, you already lost something more important. The need to win the argument is often stronger than the need to preserve the relationship. And that's where we break things we care about without even realizing it. So the next time you're in that moment, that tight, heated, chest tightening moment where you know you could destroy someone with one line, but also know it'll cost you something deeper. Pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what do I actually want right now? Their defeat or our peace? Because sometimes the real mic drop is silence. And the last word that matters is the one you choose not to say. The I'm always logical trap. You ever argue with someone who insists they're just being logical? No emotion, no bias, just pure reason. They say it like it makes them immune to being wrong, like being logical somehow means they're always right. That's the trap. The I'm always logical trap. And it's one of the sneakiest forms of ego, because it hides behind intelligence. See, logic is supposed to be the tool that keeps us grounded. But when ego gets involved, logic becomes armor. It's not about truth anymore. It's about control. It's about positioning yourself as the rational one so anyone who disagrees with you looks emotional, irrational, or worse, weak. You've seen this happen. Maybe you've even done it. Someone brings up how they feel, and instead of hearing them, you start correcting their thinking. You turn a vulnerable moment into a debate. You break down what they said like a math problem, looking for flaws, not feelings. And then when they react, you say, see, this is exactly what I mean. You're being emotional. I'm just being logical. But here's the shock: logic is never emotionless. There's always something underneath it. A belief, a bias, a fear. Logic might shape your argument, but emotion picks the argument in the first place. Every data point you choose to highlight, every example you decide matters. All of that is filtered through what you want to prove. Ego loves logic because it sounds like a higher ground. But often, it's just a higher wall. It keeps you from connecting, from listening, from acknowledging the messiness of being human, because people don't live in spreadsheets. They don't heal from flowcharts. They don't need a perfectly reasoned explanation when they're in pain. They need presence. And when you weaponize logic, you shut that down. You might think you're helping by staying calm and objective, but to the other person, it feels cold. It feels like you're calculating them instead of caring for them, like you're more interested in being correct than being kind. And when that happens, logic stops being a tool for understanding and starts being a tool for dismissal. Now let's be clear. This trap isn't about turning off your brain. It's not about throwing logic away. Logic is powerful, but it has to be in the right place. Logic is amazing for solving problems, but not for judging people. It's great for building systems, but terrible for navigating pain. It's a guide, not a god. And let's not pretend that logic is some pure, objective force that lives outside of us. It's shaped by everything: your upbringing, your culture, your insecurities, your goals. You build your logic on top of what you already believe to be true. That's not wrong. It's human. But when you forget that, when you pretend your logic is flawless and neutral, you start losing track of the emotional truth sitting right in front of you. That's how relationships break down. Not because people don't have good points, but because one person is arguing from the head while the other is crying from the heart. And when you stay stuck in logic mode, you miss what they're really trying to say. And here's the twist. People who lean on logic the hardest are often the ones afraid to feel. They've been burned by emotion, hurt by it. So they overcorrect. They put their emotions in a box and lock it with reason. And then they walk through the world as if that makes them bulletproof. But it doesn't. It just makes them disconnected from others, from themselves, because what feels like logic might actually be fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being wrong in a way that actually matters. So instead of admitting that fear, we wrap it in facts. We say things like, "I'm just being objective." We put up the logic shield, and then wonder why people still feel unheard. So what do you do instead? You get curious. You ask yourself, am I using logic to seek truth or to protect myself? Am I really listening right now or just waiting to dismantle their next sentence? Do I actually care about understanding, or do I just want to win? Because sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is feel first and think second. The moment you stop needing to be the most logical person in the room, you open yourself up to real connection. You realize that not everything needs to be solved. Some things just need to be sat with. Some arguments don't need winners. They need witnesses. So let go of the need to be the robot in the conversation, because the goal isn't to be above emotion. The goal is to hold space for it without being ruled by it. That's real emotional intelligence. And without that, your logic might be sharp, but your relationships will be dull. And when you start seeing people not as puzzles to solve, but as humans to connect with, that's when the trap breaks. The comparison trap, you don't even notice when it starts. You're just scrolling, watching, glancing, and without meaning to, you start measuring their life, their body, their wins, their friends, their vacations, their relationship, against yours quietly, subtly, but relentlessly. That's the comparison trap, and it is brutal. Because no matter where you are in life, there is always someone doing it louder, faster, cleaner, happier. It feels innocent, even motivating, like you're just setting goals or getting inspired. But somewhere in the background, ego is doing math, constantly calculating where you fall on the invisible ladder. It doesn't care if that ladder is fake. It doesn't care if what you're comparing yourself to is filtered, curated, or completely manufactured. It just wants to know if you're ahead or behind. And if it decides you're behind, it doesn't whisper. It screams. Suddenly, what you have doesn't feel like enough. Your progress feels slow. Your body feels wrong. Your job feels small. Your life somehow starts feeling like it's missing something, even if just an hour ago it felt fine. You didn't change, but your position did, at least in your mind. That's how fast it happens. One photo, one headline, one friend's announcement, and boom, you're spiraling. Here's what makes this so toxic. Comparison never compares the whole picture. It only picks the highlight of them and stacks it against the insecurity in you. You see their best moment, their best angle, their best day, and compare it to your worst mood, your tired morning, your quiet season. It's not a fair fight. But ego doesn't care. It wants something to prove. It wants a scoreboard. And it'll build one even if it has to lie to do it. And the scary part is, we don't grow out of it. Doesn't matter how much you accomplish. The more you have, the more comparison adapts. You go from wishing you had something to feeling like you don't have enough of it. You go from wanting to make it to wondering why someone else made it faster. You finally get to the mountaintop, and instead of peace, ego hands you a telescope. Look who's on the next peak. Look who's above you. Look who's already built a house up there. It never ends. And here's the twist. Ego doesn't just compare you downward. It does it upward too. You start feeling superior to people you think you're doing better than. Like your worth is rising and falling with someone else's speed. So now you're not even focused on your own lane. You're watching them, either to feel better or worse. Either way, you're distracted. That's the trap. You stop living. You start competing. But no one handed you the rules. No one even told you what the game is. You're just playing by whatever feels urgent. And it always feels urgent when you think you're falling behind. So what do? You stop measuring. Not because goals don't matter, but because other people's lives were never meant to be your measuring stick. You start asking different questions. Not am I ahead of them, but am I aligned with me? Not how fast am I moving, but am I moving in a direction that actually means something to me? Because here's the truth. Someone is always going to be ahead. Someone is always going to have more. But they can't take your meaning. They can't take your fulfillment. They can't live your purpose. That part, that's untouchable. But only if you stop handing it away every time you see someone else shining. It's not easy. You're constantly being told to hustle, to compare, to catch up. But what if you're not behind? What if you're just on a different timeline? What if this chapter of your life is building depth that their highlight reel never had to learn? Because that's something the comparison trap never shows you. The cost. You don't see what they sacrificed. You don't know what corners they cut. You don't know what it's really like behind the scenes. And even if it is as good as it looks, so what? That doesn't make your path any less worthy. It doesn't make your progress any less real. You're not here to win someone else's game. You're here to build something that feels like truth to you. And that kind of success, that doesn't come from watching. It comes from working. Quietly, intentionally, without needing to outshine anyone. The minute you stop obsessing over how your life looks next to someone else's, you free up space to actually live it. Fully, freely, authentically. And that's when the trap starts to break. The victim ego trap. Sometimes ego doesn't show up loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't posture. It plays weak, soft, subtle. It whispers things like, "Why does this always happen to me?" No one ever listens. People are so unfair. That's the victim ego trap. It doesn't look like pride. It looks like pain. But deep down, it's ego, disguising itself as powerlessness to keep control. You might think of ego as arrogance. But this is its quieter cousin. The version that hides behind hurt. That turns every setback into a story where you're the one who always loses. You're the one who's always misunderstood. You're the one who's always been wronged. And slowly, that story becomes your shield. Because if everything is happening to you, then you don't have to do anything about it. That's the trap. The more you identify as the victim, the less responsibility you feel, the less ownership you take, the more blame you can place outside yourself. And sure, sometimes people do treat you unfairly. Sometimes life is brutal. But the trap happens when you take those moments and turn them into your identity. When you get addicted to the comfort of being the one who never had a chance. Because here's the shock. Being the victim gives you something. It gives you justification. It gives you attention. It gives you an excuse. If nothing's your fault, then nothing's your job to fix. If the world is always against you, then you never have to risk stepping into it. You never have to fail, because you never tried. You never have to be rejected, because you already expect to be. That sounds harsh, but it's real. Ego isn't always the person at the front of the room. Sometimes it's the one sitting in the back, crossing their arms, thinking no one ever sees me anyway. It's still ego. It just looks like despair. But it has the same goal: protect the self-image, protect the story. And the story it tells in this trap is this: I'm helpless. I'm unlucky. I'm stuck. And nothing I do will change anything. It becomes a loop. Because the more you believe that, the more you behave like it's true. You stop trying. You sabotage. You surround yourself with people who reinforce it. And every time something hard happens, it feels like proof. See, I knew it. Nothing ever works out for me. But here's what nobody tells you. That story is addicting. Because as long as you stay in it, you don't have to risk rewriting it. You don't have to stretch. You don't have to grow. And growth, it's uncomfortable. It forces you to admit you're more powerful than you've been acting. And that kind of truth can feel terrifying when you've lived in the victim story for years. This doesn't mean you haven't been through real pain. This doesn't mean your trauma doesn't matter. But there's a difference between having pain and letting it define you. A difference between being hurt and building your identity around that hurt. Eventually, the victim ego stops being about what happened to you and starts being about what you're afraid to become. Because if you stop being the victim, then what? Now you're accountable. Now you're responsible. Now you have to confront what you've avoided. That's scary. And ego hates scary. So it would rather keep you small and safe. But you're not meant to stay small. You're meant to feel your pain and move anyway. To take the pieces of your story and build something from them, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. And honesty is the only way out of this trap. Ask yourself, when something goes wrong, do I always look outward? Do I replay how I was wronged before I ask what I can shift? Do I secretly like being underestimated because it lowers the bar for me? That's the victim ego, quiet, but heavy. And if you're not careful, it becomes the lens you see everything through. Here's the truth. You can be hurt and still powerful. You can be tired and still responsible. You can be healing and still taking steps. The world doesn't owe you fairness, but you owe yourself freedom. And that freedom starts when you stop letting your worst days speak the loudest about who you are. You're not the sum of what happened to you. You're the sum of what you choose to do next. And ego, it wants you stuck in the past. But your power lives in the present. Right now, in the next small decision, the next hard conversation, the next time you say, no more. I'm not playing small just because life tried to shrink me. And the second you stop needing to be the victim is the second you start becoming the author. The self-made illusion trap. You ever hear someone say they're self-made, like completely self-made? No help, no handouts, just grit and grind. Sounds impressive, right? It strokes the ego. Feels like power. But here's the truth that never gets said out loud. The idea of being self-made is a myth, a powerful one, a seductive one, but a myth all the same, and chasing it. That's the self-made illusion trap. Because when ego gets involved, it doesn't just want success. It wants credit. All of it. It wants to stand at the top and say, I did this. Nobody helped me. Nobody carried me. I pulled myself out of the mud with nothing but willpower and work ethic. But the second you believe that story, the second you start thinking you're the exception to all human interdependence, you stop seeing the invisible hands that held you up. And that's dangerous, because now you don't just feel proud of what you built, you feel above the people who didn't. You stop seeing people as fellow humans and start seeing them as lazy, weak, undisciplined, like they could have done what you did if they had just tried harder. But here's the shock. No one does it alone. No one. Not the billionaire. Not the athlete. Not the CEO. Not the artist. Not you. Somewhere along the way, someone opened a door, gave a kind word, offered a connection, cleared a path you didn't even realize was blocked for others. It doesn't take away your effort, but it does mean you didn't build your life in a vacuum. You had access, timing, safety, support. Maybe you had parents who believed in you, or a boss who took a chance, or a neighborhood where survival wasn't your first priority. Maybe you didn't grow up dodging bullets or wondering if the lights would be on. That's not your fault. But it is part of the picture. And when ego erases that, when it convinces you that you're the sole architect of your life, it robs you of empathy. Suddenly, you start thinking anyone who struggles is just making excuses. You start telling people to pick themselves up without ever asking if they've even been allowed to rest. You start minimizing pain you've never felt. And the worst part, you start isolating yourself. Because when you believe the self-made illusion, you can't ask for help. You can't admit weakness. You can't let anyone see you lean, even for a second. You start carrying everything, all the pressure, all the fear, all the expectations, alone, because to admit you need support would crack the image, and that image, that's ego's favorite trophy. But here's the truth most successful people don't say out loud. We are all standing on someone else's shoulders, even if we never met them. The teacher who inspired, the janitor who kept the school open, the stranger who took a chance, the generation before us that broke barriers, the friend who believed in us when we forgot how. Acknowledging that doesn't make you less accomplished. It makes you aware, and awareness is what keeps you grounded, keeps you generous, keeps you human. Because what happens when you fail? If your entire identity is built around doing it all yourself, then the moment you slip, you don't just lose progress. You lose your sense of worth. Now you're not just someone who made a mistake. You're someone who shouldn't make mistakes. Someone who was supposed to be bulletproof. And now you feel like a fraud. That's the trap. The illusion feeds your pride while quietly choking your peace. It disconnects you from community. It hardens you to compassion, and it makes you terrified of ever looking like you didn't do it all alone. But you were never meant to. That's not weakness. That's life. Real strength is not needing to be the sole hero in your story. Real strength is honoring the people who helped you write it. And real humility, it's not about downplaying your work. It's about recognizing the context of that work, the opportunities you had, the people who showed up, the moments that could have gone the other way, but didn't. So no, you're not self-made. You're self-shaped. You took what you had and made something of it. That's powerful. That matters. But it's not the whole picture. And the more honest you are about that, the freer you get to be. You don't have to carry the myth anymore. You don't have to pretend your journey was pure will and nothing else. You can celebrate what you've built without erasing what helped you build it. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And when you let go of needing all the credit, you create space for something better. Real connection, real gratitude, real growth. That's when the illusion cracks, and the human behind the image finally gets to breathe. The false modesty trap. You ever notice how some people, when they achieve something impressive, don't fully own it? Instead of standing tall, they brush it off like it was just luck or they were barely involved. Maybe they say it wasn't that big of a deal or that anyone could have done it. That's the false modesty trap sneaking in. It looks like humility, sounds like humility, but underneath it's ego disguised in a softer, quieter form, trying desperately to avoid the glare of attention while secretly craving it. It's a tricky kind of humility because it doesn't invite admiration or respect. It shuts it down. Why? Because owning success means exposing yourself. It means taking responsibility for the spotlight. And ego, as much as it wants praise, also fears judgment and scrutiny. The moment you say, "I did that," you open yourself up to people thinking you're arrogant or full of yourself. So ego's solution is to pull back, to play small, to make your win seem accidental or unimportant. It whispers to you, "Don't get too big for your boots. Stay quiet. Stay modest." But here's the thing. False modesty is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It feels like the safe, polite option, but it quietly kills confidence and growth. When you minimize your wins so much that even your own mind doubts them, you rob yourself of the fuel needed to keep pushing forward. You cheat yourself out of the motivation that comes from celebrating what you've earned. This isn't about being boastful or arrogant. It's about the balance between owning your success and not letting it inflate your ego. The problem is that many of us confuse true humility with invisibility. We think being humble means shrinking until no one notices us at all. And ego loves this. It loves it because in the quiet, your insecurities get to hide. In the silence, you avoid risking looking too proud or like you're showing off. But the cost? It's huge. When you downplay your achievements, you stop attracting the respect and opportunities you deserve. You start sending a message, sometimes to others but mostly to yourself, that what you did isn't enough. And that message sticks. It becomes a story you tell yourself over and over until you believe you don't deserve praise or recognition, that you don't deserve to be proud. Imagine that for a second. How does it feel to live with your own successes trapped inside, like they're secrets you're ashamed of? To keep quiet when you really want to celebrate, to have people praise you but deflect it like you're embarrassed or shy. It's exhausting. It's like carrying a weight that shouldn't be heavy. But it's not just exhausting, it's dangerous. Because when you can't own your wins, you don't build true confidence. You build fragile confidence that's easy to knock down the moment you face a setback. You learn to second guess yourself. You convince yourself you're lucky, not skilled. You think the success isn't really yours, and that kind of thinking traps you in a cycle of doubt. False modesty also impacts relationships. People might admire your humility, but they won't see your full power. They won't understand your full potential because you hide it from them. You miss out on opportunities to inspire others because you don't let your light shine fully. And ironically, by hiding your strength, you might attract people who don't respect or value your true worth. Here's another shock. False modesty often hides fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as boastful or arrogant. And fear is a powerful force. It can keep you small long after you know you're capable of more. Ego loves this fear because it keeps you safe. Safe from criticism, safe from exposure, safe from the vulnerability of being truly known. But the truth is, humility isn't about hiding. Real humility is about balance. It's about knowing your value without needing to prove it to anyone. It's about being honest with yourself, about celebrating your wins without guilt, and admitting your faults without shame. It's about being so comfortable in your skin that you don't have to fake false modesty to feel worthy. So what would happen if you stopped hiding? If you stopped apologizing for your success? If you started owning your wins as fully as you own your failures? You'd start building a confidence that's steady and unshakable. You'd attract people who respect you not because you shrink, but because you stand firm in your truth. You'd start to break free from a cage you might not even realize you're in. You don't have to be loud to be proud. You don't have to boast to be respected. But you do have to be real. You have to be willing to say, yes, I worked hard. Yes, I earned this. Yes, I'm proud. And that honesty will change how you see yourself and how the world sees you. The false modesty trap waits for you to shrink back, to whisper that your success doesn't count, to tell you it's safer to be invisible. But what if the real power comes from stepping fully into your light? Not to show off or boast, but to accept that your light deserves to be seen, that your effort deserves to be celebrated. And the moment you do that, the trap starts to lose its hold. You start to breathe easier. You start to live bigger, because you finally stop hiding behind the illusion that being humble means being invisible. You start living with the freedom to own all of who you are. Flaws, successes, and everything in between. The "I would never do that" trap. You know that moment when you watch someone else mess up, make a terrible mistake, or fall flat on their face, and your first thought is, "I would never do that." Like you're so far removed from that kind of failure that it couldn't possibly touch you. That's the "I would never do that" trap sneaking in, and it's more dangerous than it sounds, because it's not just an innocent gut reaction. It's ego's way of building a wall between you and everyone else, telling you you're better, smarter, or just fundamentally different. Safer, more in control. But here's the truth. Everyone falls. Everyone stumbles. Everyone makes mistakes that look insane or embarrassing when you're watching from the sidelines. It's part of being human, but this trap blinds you to that. It convinces you that the people who screw up are somehow less disciplined, less careful, less wise than you. Like their failure is a moral flaw or a character defect, not a messy part of growth and life. You watch them trip and say silently, "I would never do that," because you don't want to admit that maybe you could. That maybe you already have. That's the shock. When you think you're immune, you're actually just disconnected. You're separating yourself from reality, from vulnerability, from empathy. And that separation isn't strength. It's isolation. Because the moment you put yourself above mistakes, you lose touch with the messiness that shapes every success story. You lose the ability to learn from others' failures because you're too busy judging. You lose the humility to say, maybe I'm closer to that than I want to admit. But why does ego do this? Because mistakes hurt. They expose us. They remind us that we're not perfect, not invincible, not always in control. Ego hates that. So it deflects by pointing outward. Look at them. Not me. I'm different. I'm better. And that creates a dangerous blind spot. Because when you believe you're immune to certain failures, you stop preparing for them. You stop being cautious or reflective. You stop listening to warnings. You ignore the early signs that maybe you're headed for the same pitfall. And it gets worse. This trap also fuels judgment and division. When you say, I would never do that about someone else's mistake, you're creating distance. You're building an invisible wall that says they are separate from you, not worthy of your understanding. You miss the chance to connect, to help, to grow alongside others. And in doing so, you trap yourself in a lonely place where failure feels shameful instead of human. Here's where it gets real. The people you think you'd never act like, those people you watch and shake your head at, they might have been you a year ago, or 5 years ago, or maybe you're that person now in some way you refuse to see. The trap convinces you that the worst mistakes belong to other people, but the truth is, everyone has a blind spot. Everyone has moments they'd rather forget. Everyone has done things they swore they never would. Recognizing this doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. And honesty is the key to breaking the trap. Because once you admit you're not immune, you open the door to self-reflection. You start to watch yourself with curiosity instead of judgment. You begin to prepare for your own failures instead of pretending they can't happen. And when they do happen, you're more ready to face them without falling apart. This trap also holds you back from growth. If you believe you're so different from people who fail in certain ways, you'll never learn the lessons they offer. You'll stay stuck in your safe bubble, afraid to take risks or admit vulnerabilities. But growth demands risk. It demands failure, and it demands the willingness to say, I could be wrong. I could fail. I could fall. Breaking free from this trap means embracing your humanity. It means accepting that mistakes are not moral failings, but part of the journey. It means stopping the judgmental thoughts and replacing them with compassion for yourself and others, because when you do that, you start to build real resilience, real connection, real wisdom. And the irony, the moment you say, I could do that, I might do that, I am doing that sometimes, that's when you start to grow. That's when you stop being trapped by your ego and start being guided by your humility. You move from fear of failure to understanding failure. You move from isolation to connection. And you finally get to live a life that's brave enough to stumble and strong enough to rise again. The others are just jealous trap. It's so easy when someone criticizes you or points out a flaw to just brush it off with the classic excuse that they're just jealous. We hear it all the time. Someone challenges us or questions what we're doing, and instantly the ego flips the switch and says they're only saying that because they envy me. That's the others are just jealous trap. It feels good in the moment because it deflects the pain of criticism and wraps you in a cozy blanket of self-righteousness. But here's the catch. It's also one of the sneakiest ways ego keeps you stuck and disconnected from real growth. Because jealousy is real. People do envy others. They get bitter, resentful, and sometimes lash out because of it. But when you use jealousy as a shield every time someone challenges you, you stop listening. You stop learning. You stop asking the hard questions that could actually help you improve. The trap convinces you that all criticism is jealousy in disguise, and that no one is ever honestly trying to help you or give you feedback that could hurt but ultimately make you better. That feels good, right? To believe all the negativity coming your way isn't about your faults, but about other people's weaknesses. But it's also a lie ego loves to tell, because it keeps you safe from looking inward. It keeps you stuck in a story where you're the hero and everyone else is just bitter or envious haters. The truth: not everyone who challenges you is jealous. Some people actually care and want to see you grow. Some feedback is uncomfortable because it's necessary. And if you keep blaming jealousy, you'll never hear those voices. The shock is how much energy you waste in this trap. Instead of asking if the criticism has truth, you write off the messenger. Instead of reflecting on your own behavior, you create enemies where maybe only honest observers exist. Instead of growing, you stay stuck defending a fragile ego wrapped in the illusion of being misunderstood. And guess what? That isolation feels lonely, frustrating, and stuck. And here's the kicker: jealousy can sometimes be real, but it doesn't mean the criticism is automatically false or irrelevant. When you assume jealousy is always at play, you rob yourself of the chance to use even jealous feedback as a mirror. Because sometimes jealousy is just a mask for envy of something you've done well, and instead of dismissing it, you could learn what they see in you that's worth envying. You could figure out what strengths to nurture or weaknesses to fix. What ego really fears here is vulnerability. It fears admitting you might be wrong or not perfect, so it puts up a wall and says it's not me, it's them. This trap is all about avoiding that vulnerable moment where you actually pause, listen, and consider that maybe you're not 100% right. That maybe you could improve. That maybe you don't have all the answers, and that's scary. But growth comes from the exact opposite place. It comes from humility, the willingness to accept feedback without instantly pushing back. It comes from curiosity, asking why someone said what they said instead of dismissing it outright. It comes from courage, the guts to face criticism without shrinking or exploding. When you break free from the others are just jealous trap, you stop fighting shadows and start focusing on real change. And the irony: when you stop assuming jealousy as your default explanation, you start to build stronger relationships. People feel safe giving you honest feedback. You create space for real connection, respect, and trust. You get better because you're open, not closed. You become someone people admire, not because you're perfect, but because you're brave enough to grow. So next time someone challenges you, instead of reflexively blaming jealousy, ask yourself what's really going on. Is there truth here? Could this be an opportunity? Am I just afraid of being vulnerable? Because once you start asking those questions, you step out of the trap. You stop making enemies out of allies. You stop seeing jealousy where there might only be honest intention. The trap wants you to live in a bubble where you're always the victim of others' envy. But the real power is living in reality, where you accept feedback as fuel, not poison. Where you choose growth over defensiveness. Where you see criticism as a chance to get better, not a personal attack. And that's where the trap finally loses its grip. The perfectionist trap. You know that feeling where nothing ever feels quite good enough, where you tweak and adjust and obsess and delay, telling yourself it's not ready yet. Just one more fix, one more touch. That's not drive. That's not high standards, that's ego. That's the perfectionist trap in disguise. And it's one of the most convincing lies we tell ourselves because it sounds so noble. It wears this mask of excellence, but underneath, it's pure fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being seen as not enough. The trap starts quietly. You just want to do things right. You want to give your best, impress people, make it great. That sounds admirable, right? But then slowly, your focus shifts from the work itself to the fear of failure. Suddenly, it's not about creating, it's about controlling. Not about building something meaningful, but about avoiding mistakes at all costs. And the moment that switch happens, the ego takes over. It convinces you that perfect is the only option, that anything less is failure, that showing your work before it's flawless is embarrassing. But here's the shock. Perfectionism doesn't make you better. It makes you stuck. You spend more time hiding than creating. You obsess over details that no one will ever notice. You delay action, not because the work isn't ready, but because you're not ready to be vulnerable. You're afraid of releasing something imperfect into the world because you think it reflects your worth. That's how deep this trap goes. It makes you believe your value is tied to flawless execution, and that lie will choke your progress. What the ego doesn't tell you is that perfection is an illusion. It's a moving target. You think you're almost there, and then your standards shift again. You hit the goal, and suddenly it's not good enough. You finish the project, but now you can only see the flaws. This trap doesn't reward you, it punishes you, and worst of all, it keeps you from finishing, from starting, from sharing, from learning, from growing. And yet, it feels so justified, because perfectionism makes you feel responsible. Like you care more, like you're doing things properly. But really, it's a way to avoid discomfort, because putting imperfect work into the world feels risky. It opens the door to criticism, rejection, shame, and ego hates that. So instead of building resilience, ego builds walls. Walls of endless revision. Walls of self-doubt. Walls of procrastination dressed up as high standards. You know what's really brave? Starting before you feel ready. Shipping before it's flawless. Learning as you go. That's courage. That's real growth. That's how people evolve, not by hiding behind a fake image of perfection, but by showing up messy, raw, and honest. That's where the magic happens, in the imperfection. Perfectionism also creates a subtle kind of ego superiority. You might not even notice it, but it's there. That voice that says, I can't release this until it's better than what everyone else is doing. I have to be exceptional. That mindset is not about service or creativity. It's about proving something. And who are you trying to prove it to? Usually yourself. Because deep down, you don't feel like enough. So you polish and overwork and hide behind your standards instead of facing that uncomfortable truth. Let's be real. No one connects with perfect. They connect with real. They connect with flaws, vulnerability, honesty. When you hide behind perfection, you create distance. You make yourself untouchable, unreachable, impossible to relate to. And you miss out on the one thing we all crave, genuine connection. Not just with others, but with yourself, because you'll never feel at peace if your value depends on flawless outcomes. This trap even sabotages progress. You set goals, but you never take the first step. You plan, but you don't execute. You rehearse, but never perform. All because the ego whispers it's not ready. But here's the hard truth. It will never be ready if you keep feeding that voice. At some point, You have to decide that done is better than perfect. That finished is more valuable than flawless. That real momentum is more powerful than polished illusion. What if the thing you're afraid to share is the exact thing someone else needs to see? What if your imperfection is the bridge to someone else's courage? What if being brave enough to be unfinished is the start of everything you're waiting for? You can spend your whole life waiting for perfect. Or you can move forward now, imperfect but honest, flawed but free. The perfectionist trap wants to keep you stuck in fear disguised as excellence. But perfection is not the goal. Progress is, courage is, freedom is. And that only happens when you finally let go. The I'm too good for this trap. You ever catch yourself looking at a task, a job, or even a conversation and thinking this is beneath me? Like you're mentally stepping over it because it doesn't match your idea of who you are or who you think you should be. That's the I'm too good for this trap. It's quiet. It's slick. And it shows up in more places than we like to admit. You don't need to say it out loud. It's a tone in your mind, a shrug of superiority, a silent judgment. And here's the dangerous part. It feels like confidence. It feels like standards. But underneath it, it's pure ego. This trap tricks you into thinking that avoiding something unglamorous or uncomfortable is a sign of growth. Like saying no to basic work or difficult people means you've leveled up. But more often, it just means you've started building a wall between you and humility, between you and resilience, between you and the lessons that live in the dirt. You start rejecting things that could actually sharpen you because you're too busy protecting an identity, a title, a version of yourself that you think doesn't belong in the trenches anymore. But here's the shock. When you decide you're too good for something, you stop growing in the exact areas that matter most. You stop developing grit. You lose touch with discipline. You weaken your tolerance for discomfort. You miss the chance to lead by example because you've decided you're above the work. And whether that's helping someone out with a small task, cleaning up your own mess, or learning a new skill that doesn't match your ego, the message is the same. I don't belong here. This isn't for someone like me. But who told you that? We live in a culture that rewards status and optics. So the ego eats that up and starts building this quiet arrogance. You start filtering your choices through what looks good instead of what builds character. You want to be seen doing the important stuff, the impressive stuff, the boss level stuff. But the people who actually grow, the ones who lead for real, are the ones who don't care how it looks. They'll roll up their sleeves and do what's necessary, not just what's shiny. Let's get honest. The I'm too good for this trap isn't about worth. It's about fear. It's fear of looking small, fear of being underestimated, fear of slipping backward. The ego doesn't want to be seen cleaning the floor, starting over, learning something from scratch, or being humbled by a beginner's task. But guess what? That's where real strength comes from the unglamorous stuff, from the jobs no one applauds, from the moments that challenge your pride in all the right ways. And this trap doesn't just affect how you see yourself. It damages your relationships. When you think you're too good for something, you silently start judging others who are doing that very thing. You start distancing yourself. You stop connecting. And soon, you're not just alone. You're out of touch, out of rhythm, out of integrity. Because the truth is, nothing is beneath you if you're serious about growth. Nothing is beneath you if you care about who you're becoming more than how you look getting there. You want to be dangerous. Be the person who can give a keynote speech in the morning and sweep the floor that evening without flinching. Be the person who can teach and still learn. Who can lead and still follow when needed. Who can win and still show up for the unglamorous grind. That's real power. That's ego out of the way. That's what builds a legacy that's not just loud, but real. And look, we all fall into this trap sometimes. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means the ego is doing its job, protecting you from vulnerability. But if you don't call it out, it becomes a ceiling. You stop taking on things that stretch you. You stop exploring paths that don't fit your current image. You stop saying yes to things that might feel awkward or low status, but are actually high value for your character. The fix, humility. The kind that's not performative. The kind that doesn't care who's watching. The kind that shows up and says, if this needs to be done, I'll do it. If this moment requires me to get uncomfortable, I'm in. That doesn't make you less. It makes you unshakable. It means you can handle success without it handling you. It means your confidence isn't built on avoiding small things, but conquering them. You don't rise by pretending to be above it. You rise by being willing to do what others won't. And when you break free from this trap, something strange happens. The very things you thought were beneath you end up elevating you in ways ego never could. You build trust. You earn respect. You grow roots. And you become someone who isn't just impressive. You become real. The spotlight effect trap. You walk into a room. You feel like everyone is watching. Like every move you make is under a microscope. You say one awkward thing, and it replays in your mind all night, as if it became the headline of your life. That is the spotlight effect. And when your ego grabs hold of it, it turns into one of the most exhausting traps there is. The ego loves to believe we are constantly being observed, evaluated, judged, that people are always noticing us, thinking about us, forming opinions about every little thing we say or do. And logically, we might know that is not true. But emotionally, it feels real. The ego panics. It says you messed up. You look stupid. You were too loud, too quiet, too awkward, too much, not enough. It plays the tape over and over again because it is convinced the world noticed and is still talking about it. Here is the truth that feels like a slap in the face. Most people are not thinking about you, not because you are not important, not because you are not worthy, but because they are all too busy thinking about themselves. Everyone is caught in their own spotlight, their own worries, their own self-consciousness. That thing you said that is keeping you up at night. They probably did not even notice. Or if they did, they forgot, because their ego was too busy wondering what you thought of them. The spotlight effect trap is a form of ego anxiety. It tricks you into performing instead of living. You stop being present. You start filtering everything through how you might look instead of how you actually feel. You laugh a little less freely. You speak a little more cautiously. You avoid trying new things unless you can be sure you will look good doing it. And that is the real cost. You become smaller, safer, less alive. And here is what makes it even trickier. This trap is not always loud. Sometimes it shows up in hesitation, in overthinking, in holding back. You do not speak up in the meeting because what if it sounds dumb? You do not dance at the wedding because what if people laugh? You do not post that video because what if no one likes it? Every action gets weighed against an imaginary audience. And that audience becomes the gatekeeper of your freedom. The ego convinces you that being judged is the worst thing that could happen, but that is not true. Being judged is inevitable. Being paralyzed by the fear of being judged. That is the real tragedy, because then you are not even living your own life. You are living for an audience that probably does not even exist. You ever notice how free little kids are before they become self-aware? They sing when they want to. They fall and get back up without shame. They ask the weird questions. They wear mismatched outfits and do not care. And then slowly ego creeps in. It says people are watching. People are laughing. Be careful. Be polished. Be cool. And just like that, we start trading freedom for approval. We stop playing. We start performing. But what if you stopped caring so much about the imaginary spotlight? What if you stopped assuming everyone's eyes were on you and realized most people are trying to survive their own insecurities? That they are not focused on your shirt or your stutter or your awkward laugh. They are busy wondering if you noticed theirs. When you really let that sink in, something unlocks. The fear shrinks, the performance ends, and your real self gets to come out and breathe. Here is the wild part. The less you obsess about how you are perceived, the more authentic and magnetic you become. People are not drawn to perfection. They are drawn to presence, to comfort in your own skin, to the kind of person who does not need to impress because they are too busy being real. You do not have to be invisible. You just have to stop thinking the spotlight is always on you, because it is not. And once you realize that, you stop walking on eggshells and start walking in power. This trap thrives on insecurity disguised as self-awareness. But the way out is brutal honesty. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to or because I think I should? Am I quiet because I am calm or because I am afraid? Am I speaking up to connect or to impress? Ego will always push you to perform. Your real self just wants to live. Let that part lead. And here is the invitation. Mess up in public. Laugh at your own awkwardness. Admit when you do not know something. Do the thing anyway. That is how you destroy the spotlight effect. Not by shrinking, but by showing up anyway. Let them see you stumble. Let them hear your voice crack. Let them see the human behind the mask. That is where your freedom lies. The humble brag trap. There is a kind of brag that does not sound like bragging. It wears a soft smile, a gentle shrug, maybe even a self-deprecating tone. It says, I'm not trying to show off but, and then it does exactly that. This is the humble brag trap. And the worst part is, we often do not even know we are doing it. It slips out like a reflex. Because deep down, the ego is craving recognition. It just wants to get it without looking needy. So it hides inside a compliment to someone else. It sneaks into a story about struggle. It wraps itself in fake modesty so no one can call it out. That is what makes this trap so hard to see. You will hear it in things like I just threw this together last minute, and everyone loved it. Or ooh, if I'm so exhausted, I've been slammed with offers lately. Or even I feel awkward saying this, but I guess I'm just used to being the one people come to for advice. It is bragging, but it is disguised. And the disguise is what keeps the ego safe. It gets the validation it wants while pretending not to need it. But here is the punch in the gut. The humble brag does not connect you to people. It disconnects you. Because on the surface it sounds modest, but underneath, people feel the pull. The insecurity, the manipulation. They might not say anything, but they feel it, that you are trying to signal your value while pretending not to. And when people sense that gap between what you are saying and what you are really doing, trust starts to slip. This trap is sneaky because it gives you a momentary high. You get to flex without risking the backlash of being called arrogant. It feels safer than just saying I'm proud of this, or I worked hard for this, or I'm excited about this. But safe does not mean honest. Safe does not mean strong. It just means your ego is still afraid of what people will think. So it wears humility like armor. But it is not really humility. It is performance. Real humility is not about shrinking. It is about standing fully in what you have done without needing to disguise it. You can own your success without turning it into a pity story. You can share a win without wrapping it in false modesty. In fact, the more comfortable you are with your value, the less you need to humble brag at all. Because real confidence speaks quietly. It does not need to sneak in the back door. It just walks in, calm and clear, no apology, no exaggeration. And yes, it is hard, because we are wired to crave approval, to want people to know we are smart, capable, successful. The ego feeds on that. So when you achieve something or feel proud of something, it starts whispering. Tell them, but not directly. Make it look casual. Make it sound humble. That way, if someone judges you, you can say you were not bragging. It is a shield. But it is also a lie. And over time, that lie starts to rot your relationships. Because people do not trust what feels fake. And most of all, you stop trusting yourself. You start second-guessing everything you say, wondering if people are seeing through it, editing yourself constantly to strike that perfect balance of impressive but relatable. But you are not free. You are just carefully managing your image. And that is exhausting. What would happen if you just dropped the act? If you said thank you instead of brushing off praise? If you shared your accomplishments without dressing them in self-doubt? Because here is the thing. You can own your light without dimming it for anyone. You can be proud without being arrogant. The difference is not in what you say, but why you say it. Bragging says, look at me so I can feel worthy. Sharing says, this is part of my journey and I am excited about it. One is hungry. The other is full. People can feel the difference, even if the words sound similar. The humble brag trap keeps you stuck in a loop of not quite owning your wins and not quite hiding them either. It creates this weird tension where you never feel fully seen because you are never being fully honest. And maybe the deepest truth is this. When you stop pretending to be less, people finally get to see who you really are. Not the performance, not the subtle flex, but the actual human being underneath it all. So here is your challenge. Next time you want to share something good, just say it. Drop the humble. Drop the detour. Speak it with clarity, not ego. And if someone judges you for it, let them. You are not responsible for how they feel about your light. You are only responsible for not dimming it just to make it more digestible. Let your pride be clean. Let your story be real. That is how you escape this trap, not by hiding, but by standing fully in the truth without the mask. The savior complex trap. There is a version of helping that does not come from love. It comes from ego. It looks like compassion on the outside. It sounds like generosity. But underneath, it is all about control, significance, and the need to be needed. That is the savior complex trap, and it feels noble. It feels selfless. But in reality, it is often just another way the ego feeds itself while pretending to care. This trap shows up when you think you are the only one who can fix things. When you insert yourself into other people's problems without being asked. When you keep offering advice, help, or support even when it drains you. Not because it is right, but because being the rescuer makes you feel valuable. It is not about their healing. It is about your identity. You are the strong one, the wise one, the one everyone turns to. And slowly, you start building your sense of self around being that person. Not because it is healthy, but because it makes you feel important. And here is the brutal truth. Sometimes you are not helping. You are enabling. You are overstepping. You are solving problems that are not yours to solve. And that is not generosity. That is control wearing a mask. You see, the ego hates powerlessness. It cannot stand watching someone else struggle while doing nothing. So, instead of sitting in the discomfort of not being able to fix it, the ego says, "Let me take over. Let me carry this. Let me save them." Not always because they asked. Not always because it is what they need, but because it calms your own anxiety to be the one in control. You get to feel useful, strong, wise, even superior. And all of that gets wrapped in a bow called helping. But here is the cost. When you keep jumping in to save people, you rob them of the very struggle that could make them stronger. You interrupt their growth. You send the message that they cannot handle life without you, that they are too weak, too lost, too broken to figure it out themselves. And worst of all, you start tying your worth to their dependence. If they get better, if they grow, if they stop needing you, who are you then? The savior complex is not just about what you do for others. It is about the identity you have built around being indispensable. And when that gets threatened, when someone sets boundaries, when they do not take your advice, when they move on, it feels like a rejection, like a loss. Because your ego was not just helping. It was feeding. It needed them to need you. And the guilt that comes with this trap is heavy, because it feels like you are doing something good, and you probably are, sometimes. You do care. You do want to help, but mixed into that is a fear of being irrelevant, a fear of being ordinary, a fear of sitting with your own pain instead of constantly fixing someone else's. Helping people is not the problem. Needing to be the hero, that is the trap. And it can burn you out fast, because the moment your worth depends on being the rescuer, you never feel like you can stop. You carry everyone's weight. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay in unhealthy dynamics because leaving would make you feel selfish. But this is not compassion. This is self-abandonment. Real compassion means knowing where you end and someone else begins. It means knowing that you are not responsible for everyone's healing. You are not a solution. You are a person, a human being, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and trust that people are capable of saving themselves. And if you really want to know where this trap leads, it leads to resentment. Quiet, hidden resentment. Because eventually you get tired. You start feeling unappreciated. You start wondering why no one helps you the way you help them. But you set that up. You built your identity around being the strong one, the fixer, the emotional sponge. You trained people to depend on you, and now you are mad that they do. So how do you escape this? You stop tying your worth to what you do for others. You stop rushing in with solutions. You start asking instead of assuming. You practice being with people in their pain without needing to fix it. You give people the dignity of their own struggle. And you give yourself the freedom to not carry what is not yours. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "I trust you to figure this out," not because you do not care, but because you believe in them more than your ego believes in itself. Let that sink in. You are not here to rescue everyone. You are here to walk beside them, not carry them. You are not the answer to every problem, and that is not failure. That is freedom. The narrative trap. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to the story you told yourself about it. That is the narrative trap, and it runs your life in ways you do not even see. You think you are responding to facts, but really you are responding to a script, one your ego wrote a long time ago. It starts early, something happens. Maybe someone ignores you. Maybe you fail at something. Maybe you get hurt. And instead of just feeling it and moving on, the ego turns it into a story. It says, "This always happens to me. I am not enough. People cannot be trusted. I have to do everything on my own." That story becomes your filter. And from that moment on, every experience gets shaped around it. Not because it is true, but because your ego needs it to be true. This trap is not about what is happening. It is about the meaning you attach to it. Someone cancels plans, and you tell yourself they do not care about you. You do not get picked for something, and you decide you are invisible. Someone gives you feedback, and you hear that you are a failure. These stories do not ask for permission. They just start running, quietly, in the background. And suddenly you are not just living, you are defending your narrative. The scary part is how much your ego depends on these stories to feel stable. Even the painful ones. Even the ones that hold you back. Because if the story is familiar, it feels safe. You know your role in it. You get to be the underdog, or the victim, or the misunderstood genius, or the one who never gets a break. It gives you a sense of identity, a reason, a script to follow. But here is the cost. Once the narrative takes over, truth becomes irrelevant. You stop listening to what people are actually saying. You listen for what matches the story. You ignore the exceptions. You filter out anything that does not align. You self-sabotage just to prove the story right. And the ego loves that. It loves being right more than it loves being free. This is why people stay stuck in the same patterns for years. Same arguments, same types of relationships, same failures, same self-doubt. Not because they cannot grow, but because their ego already wrote the ending, and it refuses to rewrite it. It is not that the world is repeating itself. It is that your story is, over and over, until you get brave enough to question it. And here is the twist. The narrative feels like clarity, but it is actually a cage. It limits what you allow yourself to see. It turns people into characters. It turns uncertainty into threat. It turns your future into a repeat of your past, and it all feels justified, logical, even noble. But it is not the truth. It is just the version of truth that makes your ego feel most comfortable. And if you are not careful, the narrative starts doing something even darker. It becomes your protection. You start using it to avoid vulnerability, to dodge responsibility, to explain away the pain, to control the chaos. Because if your story is true, you do not have to change. You do not have to risk. You just keep playing your role and blaming the plot. But deep down, you know when the story you are living no longer fits who you want to be. You can feel it, that quiet tension, that tug between your truth and your ego's version of it. The more you grow, the heavier the story feels, because now it is not protecting you, it is limiting you. And this is where the work begins. You have to start noticing the story while it is running, not after the damage, not after the fight, in the moment. Catch the voice that says, "Here we go again," or "They never listen," or "Nothing ever works out." Ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it just familiar? Is this fact? Or is it fear? Because when you start doing that, something opens. You realize you are not the story. You are the storyteller. And that means you can edit. You can rewrite. You can say maybe they were just busy. Maybe this is a one-time mistake. Maybe I failed because I took a risk. And that is worth something. You stop needing to be right, and you start being curious. And that is the moment the trap begins to break. You do not have to abandon every part of your story. Some of it might be true. Some of it might be earned. But you have to hold it lightly. You have to be willing to say maybe. Maybe there is more to this. Maybe this person is not my enemy. Maybe I am not stuck. Maybe I have changed. Because freedom does not come from proving your story right. It comes from rewriting the story when it no longer serves you, and the ego will fight that. It will say you are betraying yourself. It will say you are being naive. But the truth is, the strongest thing you can do is update the story. That is not weakness. That is growth. And you might be surprised what happens when you do. The world gets bigger. People start showing up differently. Possibilities you never saw before start to appear. Not because they are new, but because now you can finally see them. The identity investment trap. Ever notice how hard it is to admit you were wrong about something you've believed for years? Even when the facts are right in front of you. Even when you know deep down something shifted. That resistance is not always about logic. It's about identity. That is the identity investment trap. When your sense of self is so tangled up in an idea, a role, a label, or a worldview, that letting it go feels like losing a piece of yourself. It sounds like I'm not the kind of person who does that. Or I've always believed this. Or this is just who I am. It feels like strength, like certainty. But under the surface, it is fear. Because once your ego invests in something as part of who you are, it will do anything to protect that investment, even at the cost of truth, connection, and growth. The trap is subtle. It creeps in when you achieve something, and suddenly, you are not just someone who did a thing, you are that thing. I'm the successful one. I'm the high performer. I'm the leader. I'm the deep thinker. It shows up when you adopt a belief and start filtering everything through it. I'm spiritual. I'm rational. I'm a rebel. I'm logical. I'm tough. It becomes armor. But armor always has a price. Because now, anything that challenges that identity feels like an attack. If you built your whole self around being strong, vulnerability feels like weakness. If you see yourself as smart, not knowing something feels like failure. If your identity is tied to being self-made, accepting help feels like losing. And so you start defending the identity, not because it is still true, but because you are scared of who you'd be without it. And here's where it gets dangerous. When your identity is on the line, truth becomes negotiable. You start ignoring evidence that contradicts it. You cherry-pick what fits. You argue not to understand, but to win. You double down on beliefs that no longer serve you just because they've become part of your brand. It stops being about what's real. It starts being about what protects your image. And this happens everywhere. In careers, in politics, in relationships, in personal growth. Someone says something that contradicts your worldview, and you instantly feel tense, not because what they're saying is wrong, but because it threatens your identity. If they're right, what does that say about you? About the version of yourself you've spent years curating? That's the trap. You invest so heavily in the story of who you are that the cost of change feels too high. You'd rather stay stuck than evolve. You'd rather be consistent than honest. Because change feels like death to the ego. It would rather live in a cage of certainty than face the unknown of reinvention. But here's the irony. The very thing you are trying to protect is what's holding you back. That fixed identity you're clinging to is the reason you feel stuck. You can't grow if you can't outgrow. You can't become more if you're addicted to being consistent with who you used to be. Evolution requires ego death. Not all at once, but in pieces. Little releases, tiny truths, honest admissions. I was wrong. I've changed. I no longer believe that. I don't know anymore. I'm learning. It hurts. But it also heals. And I get it. The fear is real. When you let go of a piece of your identity, it can feel like standing naked in a room full of mirrors. Like you don't know who you are without your labels. Like you're starting over. But what if that's not the end? What if it's the beginning? What if identity isn't something to protect, but something to evolve? You are not the job title. You are not the belief system. You are not the past version of yourself. You are not the role people expect you to play. You're not even the personality you've gotten used to performing. You are something deeper, something that outlives every idea you've clung to. And when you let go of the performance, you actually get to meet yourself again. Maybe for the first time. And let's be honest, people can feel when you're trapped in identity. You become rigid, predictable, defensive, like a character instead of a person. But when you start letting go, you get fluid, you get curious. You become someone who can evolve out loud. And that's magnetic, that's power, that's freedom. So here's the question most people avoid. Who are you if you stop being who you've always been? What falls away? What opens up? What becomes possible? If you're brave enough to ask that, you're already halfway out of the trap. Because real growth isn't about becoming someone else. It's about letting go of the version of you that was built for survival and stepping into the version that's ready to live. The advice-giving trap. You ever notice how fast people are to give advice? You say one thing, that you're struggling, you're unsure, you're stuck, and before you even finish the sentence, they've already got a solution for you. You should do this. Just try that. Have you thought about this other thing? And maybe it sounds helpful. Maybe they really do mean well. But underneath it all, there's something else going on. Giving advice is not always about helping. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about the ego needing to be the one who knows. That's the trap, the advice-giving trap. The moment your ego sees someone vulnerable or confused, it jumps in with answers, not because it's listening, but because it wants to feel useful, valuable, above the chaos. And the easiest way to feel above someone else's chaos is to pretend you figured yours out. So we play expert, we play guide, we play therapist, and we get to feel powerful without ever doing the hard work of actually being present. Here's what most people won't say out loud. Giving advice feels good. There's an emotional high in being the one who knows better. It feeds the part of the ego that wants status without admitting it. We get to feel like the wise one, the healed one, the one with clarity. But here's the dark side. When your ego is attached to being the one with the answers, you stop connecting with the person in front of you. You stop listening for what's real. You stop asking questions. You stop being human and start performing a role. And even worse, advice can become a way to avoid your own discomfort. Someone shares something raw, something messy, And instead of sitting in that vulnerability with them, you reach for the nearest tip or tactic. Because feeling someone else's pain might trigger your own. Because holding space means giving up control. And because deep down, your ego hates not having the solution. It hates the unknown. So it masks that fear with certainty and calls it wisdom. But here's the hard truth. Most advice is not about them. It's about you. It's about your need to be needed, your need to be right, your fear of being helpless. And the real cost is trust. Because when people come to you and all they get is instruction, they stop bringing you their truth. They stop being open. They stop sharing the messy parts. Because they learn that with you, it's not safe to just be. They have to be fixable. Think about it. How many times have you shared something personal and instead of being heard, you got a lecture? How did that feel? Probably like you were being handled, not held. That's what advice can do when it's driven by ego instead of care. It becomes a barrier, a subtle dismissal, a way of saying, I know better than you. And even if that's not what you mean, it's what lands. And if you're really honest, you've probably given advice that you're not even living yourself. Advice that sounds good, that makes you look wise, that lets you feel above the struggle. But behind the scenes, you're still figuring it out too. That's not just hypocrisy. That's performance. The ego's favorite game. The truth is, most people don't need advice. They need presence. They need space to be where they are without being rushed to the finish line. They need someone who can say, yeah, that's hard, and just sit with them in it. Because 9 times out of 10, people already know what they need to do. They just haven't felt safe enough to admit it, and no amount of clever suggestions will create that safety. Only real connection does. Now, that doesn't mean advice is always bad. There's a time and place. Sometimes someone genuinely asks, what do you think I should do? And if you've earned their trust, if you've really listened, your input can land. But advice should be the last thing you offer, not the first. And it should come from humility, not performance. Not because you think you know better, but because you're willing to walk with them through the uncertainty. So before you give advice, ask yourself, what's my real intention here? Am I trying to help, or am I trying to feel helpful? Am I being present, or am I avoiding discomfort? Am I offering something real, or am I performing a version of who I think I should be? Because when you stop trying to be the answer, you become something even more powerful. A mirror, a space, a witness. And that is what actually changes people. Not your ideas, not your hacks, but your ability to stay human with them while they figure it out for themselves. You want to be someone who helps people grow. Start by giving up the need to be the one who knows, and instead become the one who sees. That's where the real power lies. The reputation management trap. There's a point in life when it stops being about who you are and starts being about how you're seen. You feel it in your choices, in your words, even in your silence. You begin to curate, edit, filter. You ask yourself not what's true, but how will this look? That's when the trap is already closing in. The reputation management trap. The moment your identity becomes a brand and your life becomes a performance. It's subtle at first. You clean up your language. You hide your doubts. You downplay your struggles. You present the version of yourself that gets approval, praise, applause. It feels smart, strategic, like you're in control. But slowly, your truth starts shrinking. You start thinking in optics. You start living in projection. And before you know it, you're not living for yourself anymore. You're living to protect an image. And that image becomes everything. The polished version of you that never messes up. The confident version that always knows what to say. The admirable version that other people talk about when you're not in the room. And once that version is out there, the pressure is on to maintain it. The ego panics at anything that might crack it. So you hide more, edit more, distance yourself from anything that might make you look weak, lost, uncertain, or human. And here's the shocker. The more you succeed, the more this trap tightens. When you've built a reputation for being smart, you avoid saying I don't know. When you're known for being composed, you suppress your emotions. When people look up to you, you feel guilty for not having it all together. You become a prisoner of your own image. And it looks like success from the outside, but inside, you're just managing perception, not living truth, the real danger. You start confusing approval with alignment. You start thinking if people like it, it must be right. If it gets praise, it must be working. If it protects your image, it must be smart. But in doing that, you lose track of what's real. You start betraying small pieces of yourself just to keep the mask intact. And the more often you do that, the more distant you become from your own center. And no one talks about the exhaustion of it. The emotional weight of having to constantly monitor how you're perceived. To never let your guard down. To feel like every move is a PR decision. It's not just stressful. It's dehumanizing. You become a character in a story written by your ego. And the world might love that character, but you know, deep down, that it's not the full you. Let's get brutally honest. A lot of what people call professionalism, leadership, or branding is just fear dressed up in strategy. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being judged. Fear of disappointing the image you've worked so hard to build. And when fear runs the show, authenticity dies a slow death. Because the ego doesn't want to be real. It wants to be right. It wants to be respected. It wants to be liked. And liked consistently. But here's the paradox. The more you protect your reputation, the less real connection you actually feel. People may admire you, but they won't know you. They'll trust the mask, not the person. And that creates distance. It creates loneliness. You end up surrounded by validation, but starving for realness. And the worst part is, you don't even know how to drop the act anymore. Because you've convinced yourself that without the reputation, you are nothing. So let me offer something raw. You don't owe anyone a perfect image. You don't have to perform your worth. You don't have to manage every detail of how people see you. What you owe is honesty, integrity, humanity. And yeah, that means risking misunderstanding. It means showing up when you're unsure. It means letting people see the parts of you that aren't fully resolved. But that's where freedom lies. Not in the polished version, but in the real one. Because the truth is, the people who matter are not impressed by your image. They are moved by your courage, by your honesty, by your willingness to be seen without a script. Reputation is shallow. Connection is deep. And the moment you trade one for the other, you start to feel alive again. And no, this doesn't mean throwing your reputation away. It means stop worshiping it. It means stop shaping your life around optics. It means leading with what's true, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Because the people who are brave enough to live unfiltered, they're the ones we remember. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real. So ask yourself, are you living or are you managing? Are you creating or are you curating? Are you being seen or are you being approved? The answers to those questions will tell you exactly how deep in the trap you really are. The experience equals expertise trap. There's this moment in life where you stop learning and start leaning. Not on curiosity, not on growth, but on what you already know. You've been through a lot. You've seen things. You've figured stuff out. And somewhere along the way, experience quietly becomes your proof, your credentials, your mic drop. You don't question it because you've lived it. And so you think that makes you right. That's the trap. The experience equals expertise trap, where what you've survived turns into a badge that says you've got it all figured out. It sounds noble, like wisdom, like authority, like earned knowledge. And sometimes it is. But the ego doesn't just collect experience. It weaponizes it. It starts to believe that because you've done it once, you understand it forever. Because you've been through something, your view is the view. Because you've put in time, your perspective is untouchable. And that's where things start to rot. Because experience doesn't automatically equal clarity. It doesn't guarantee accuracy. It doesn't mean your interpretation is flawless. But once the ego locks onto that story, that your history is your credibility, it stops listening. It stops questioning. It stops growing. You start saying things like, trust me, I've been there. Or I've seen this 100 times. And maybe you have. But the problem is, life doesn't repeat. People don't clone. Context changes everything. And the moment you start seeing your past as a universal rule book, you start misreading the present. You think you're helping. You think you're teaching. But what you're really doing is projecting. You take your old wounds, your past patterns, your former wins, and you apply them to everything. Whether or not they fit. You dismiss new data. You shut down new voices. And slowly, your experience becomes a wall instead of a window. It stops you from seeing what's actually in front of you. And here's the brutal part. The more experience you have, the more confident you become in your blind spots. Because you think I've seen this before. I know how this ends. But do you? Or do you just recognize something familiar and fill in the rest with your own story? That's how people get stuck. That's how leaders go tone deaf. That's how parents misunderstand their kids. That's how mentors fail their students. They stop seeing people as they are and start seeing them through the filter of what they've been through. And no one wants to admit this, because experience is supposed to be this sacred thing, this badge of wisdom, this hard-earned truth. But experience is just raw data. What matters is how you process it, whether you let it humble you or harden you, whether it makes you more open or more rigid. And too many people use it as an excuse to stop evolving. They say things like, this is just how the world works, or that's not how we used to do it, and they're not listening. They're broadcasting their past instead of engaging with the now, and the ego loves that. Because the ego doesn't want you to learn. It wants you to already know. It wants to feel superior, unshakable, untouchable. So it clings to the past and calls it insight. But the moment you believe your experience makes you right by default, you stop being useful. You stop being teachable. You stop being present. You're not mentoring anymore. You're monologuing. And yeah, this one hits hard because it hides behind good intentions. You want to help. You want to guide. You want to protect people from the pain you've been through. But sometimes, That help turns into arrogance. You speak over people instead of with them. You give advice they never asked for. You assume you know their situation better than they do. And that's not leadership. That's ego dressed up as guidance. So what do you do with your experience? You don't throw it away. You honor it. You let it inform you, not define you. You let it sharpen your questions, not your assumptions. You stay open, curious, humble. You learn how to say, maybe I don't know. Maybe this is different. Maybe I need to listen longer. That doesn't erase your wisdom. It amplifies it. Because people don't trust the loudest voice in the room. They trust the one who listens deeply and speaks carefully. The one who holds their experience like a tool, not a trophy. Because real expertise isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to ask better questions. It's about knowing your experience is a lens, not a law. And if you want to grow, if you want to actually impact people, you've got to get honest with yourself about the places where your past might be blocking your vision. So, next time you feel the urge to say, I already know this, or I've seen this before, pause. Ask yourself, am I really seeing what's in front of me, or am I just seeing what's familiar? Because when you trade certainty for curiosity, when you let go of the need to always be right, that's when your experience actually becomes wisdom. That's when you're not just repeating the past. You're evolving beyond it. The too busy trap. There's this thing we all say without thinking. I'm just too busy. It rolls off the tongue like a fact, like a law of nature, like gravity. And yeah, life is full. Work stacks up. Responsibilities pile on. You've got people depending on you, fires to put out, deadlines breathing down your neck. But if you zoom out, and I mean really zoom out, you'll realize something most people never admit. The whole I'm too busy thing, it's not always about time. It's about ego. And that's the trap. Because being busy doesn't just make you feel important. It makes you feel valuable. It creates this illusion that you matter because your schedule is overflowing. That you're doing something right because you don't have a second to spare. You convince yourself that your business is proof of your worth. But here's the twist. Sometimes we fill our calendars to avoid facing the truth. Truth about ourselves. Truth about what we're avoiding. Truth about the things we say matter, but never actually make time for. It's sneaky. You say you care about your health, but you're too busy to rest. You say your relationships are a priority, but you're too busy to call back. You say you want clarity, growth, peace, but you've scheduled your way out of silence. You've filled every gap, every crack. So there's no space left for reflection, for honesty, for change. And that's how business becomes a shield. You don't have to deal with your emptiness if you're constantly in motion. You don't have to face your dissatisfaction if your day is too packed to notice it. You don't have to feel lost if you've convinced yourself there's no time to stop and ask where you're going. And the world applauds it. People admire the hustle. They romanticize the grind. They respect the person who's always in meetings, always chasing, always unavailable. But let's be real. A full calendar doesn't mean a full life. It might just mean you've forgotten how to be still. Or worse, you're afraid to be. Because stillness reveals things. It turns down the volume on the noise and forces you to hear what's actually going on inside. What you're missing. What you're neglecting. What you've buried under the excuse of I'm too busy. And the ego hates that. It doesn't want introspection. It wants validation, and business brings that. People praise your work ethic. They admire your output. They respect how little sleep you get. It feeds the part of you that wants to feel irreplaceable, important, above the crowd. But deep down, you know, this isn't sustainable. You're not thriving. You're surviving. You're moving fast, but not necessarily forward. And the cost? It's quiet, but massive. You start losing depth in your conversations. You miss the subtle cues in your relationships. You forget what you used to care about before your calendar got hijacked. You become reactive instead of intentional. You live on autopilot, always catching up, never checking in. And here's where it gets dangerous. When someone calls you out, gently asks, "Why haven't we talked?" or says you haven't seemed like yourself, the ego lashes back. "I've just been busy." That one sentence shuts the door. It keeps people at a distance. It makes you untouchable. And that's when business becomes not just a shield, but a barrier. It protects you from accountability, from vulnerability, from connection. And listen, this isn't some productivity shame fest. You can be driven. You can build big things. You can have goals and ambition and a calendar full of purpose. That's not the issue. The trap is when you use being busy to avoid being honest. When you hide behind it. When you let it become your identity. Because here's the truth. We all make time for what we value, even if it's in small ways. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if it's messy. So if you say you don't have time, what you're really saying is, it's not a priority right now. And that's fine. That's honest. But own it. Don't use the too busy label to dodge the deeper truth. So ask yourself, what have you been too busy for? And what would happen if you stopped wearing that like a badge? What might you have to feel? Admit. Change. Because time is not the issue. Attention is. Intention is. The courage to slow down and listen is. You might find that the things you've been avoiding in your stillness are the very things that would set you free. Peace doesn't come when your calendar clears. It comes when your ego lets go of the need to prove itself every second of the day. And no, it won't be easy. Stillness is uncomfortable. It's confronting, but it's also the space where clarity lives, where real priorities surface, where truth gets a chance to breathe. So the next time you feel yourself about to say, "I'm just too busy," pause. Ask yourself, too busy for what, really? Too busy to feel, too busy to think, too busy to care. Because when you stop chasing everything, you finally have space to notice what actually matters. And you just might find that the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. The blame avoidance trap. You know what's easier than looking in the mirror? Pointing the finger. That's the blame avoidance trap. And once you're in it, you can't even tell it's happening, because it feels like defense, like logic, like self-respect. You tell yourself it wasn't really my fault. I only reacted because they pushed me. I did what I could. It's not fair to put this on me. And slowly, without even meaning to, you start rewriting reality just to avoid accountability. Now here's the wild part. It's not just about ego. It's about survival. When something goes wrong, when there's tension or failure or fallout, your brain wants one thing: to protect you, to keep your self-image intact. Because if this was your fault, then maybe you're not as smart or kind or in control as you thought. And the ego can't stand that. So what does it do? It redirects. It finds a scapegoat. It bends the story just enough to keep you innocent. And you start saying things like, "Well, if they had just listened," or "I didn't have enough time," Or they misunderstood me, and maybe those things are partially true. But here's where it gets dangerous. The moment you start avoiding blame, you also avoid growth. You stop asking the real questions. What was my role in this? What did I ignore? What could I have handled differently? See, owning your part is uncomfortable, but avoiding it keeps you stuck. You keep repeating the same dynamics, the same arguments, the same regrets, because you never stayed in the discomfort long enough to change anything. And the more you avoid blame, the more you build a version of yourself that can do no wrong. But that version of you is fragile, because deep down, you know the truth. You know when you dropped the ball, when you ghosted instead of communicating, when you escalated instead of listening, when you played victim instead of stepping up. And what's worse, you know people see it too, but they stop calling it out because every time they do, you deflect, you defend, you explain it away, and eventually they just stop bothering. Now you're in a bubble of your own creation, where every issue is someone else's fault and every consequence is unfair. That's not confidence. That's ego panic dressed up as self-preservation. And the cost? Relationships suffer. Trust erodes. People feel unheard. Teams fall apart. Because no one wants to be around someone who's never wrong. It's exhausting. It's invalidating. It creates an emotional climate where everyone walks on eggshells, hoping this time maybe you'll own up. But if you're stuck in this trap, you never do. You double down. You spin the story faster. You drown in your own justifications. And look, it's not about blaming yourself for everything. That's not the point. Accountability is not shame. It's clarity. It's saying, I see where I messed up, and I'm doing something about it. That's strength. That's maturity. That's what turns conflict into healing. But you can't get there if your ego's entire mission is to keep you blameless. And this isn't just a personal issue. It shows up everywhere. In leadership, in parenting, in friendships, in culture. The people who grow are the ones who can say, this part was on me. I didn't handle that well. I missed something. I made a bad call. And the irony. The more you admit your flaws, the more trustworthy you become. Because people can feel the difference between fake perfection and real accountability. But here's the kicker. Blame avoidance doesn't just hurt others. It traps you in a life where nothing is ever your fault, but nothing is ever your power either. Because if you're never responsible, then you're never in control. You're always waiting for someone else to fix it, to apologize, to change. And that leaves you powerless, bitter, stuck in patterns you secretly hate. So what if you flipped the script? What if you stopped running from blame and started using it as a mirror? Not to punish yourself, but to free yourself. What if you asked, not just what happened, but who was I being when it happened? What did I prioritize? What did I ignore? That's how you evolve. That's how you grow beyond the version of you that needs to be flawless. Because the truth is, you're going to screw up. You're going to miss things. You're going to hurt people. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. But if you can't own your impact, you'll never change your patterns. And if you never change your patterns, you'll just keep swapping faces while repeating the same story. So next time something goes wrong and your brain starts crafting that clean escape, stop. Breathe. Ask the question your ego doesn't want you to ask. What part of this is mine? And then listen. Because that moment, right there, that's where your power lies. Not in being perfect, but in being honest. The memory rewrite trap Think about your past. Any moment. A conversation. A decision. A memory you've carried for years. You probably believe it happened exactly the way you remember it. But what if I told you it didn't? That's the memory rewrite trap. It doesn't announce itself. There's no glitch in the matrix, no dramatic music cue. It's subtle, creeps in slowly. It happens when your ego quietly edits the past, not to deceive others, but to protect you from discomfort. You'll swear you remember things clearly. You'll feel the conviction in your bones. But the truth is, memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. And every time you revisit it, it's filtered through your current emotions, your self-image, your need to be the hero or the victim. This is the scary part. You're not lying when you rewrite a memory. You genuinely believe it. That's what makes the trap so dangerous. You're changing the past not to manipulate others, but to keep yourself safe. From regret, from shame, from the idea that maybe, just maybe, you weren't as innocent or as right as you want to remember. Let's say you had a falling out with someone. Years go by. You replay the argument, but you start to forget the things you said that cut deep. You forget the silence you offered when they needed honesty, and instead, your mind emphasizes the ways they hurt you, the lines they crossed. Your role shrinks, theirs expands, until you walk around with this polished version of the story where you were justified, reasonable, misunderstood, and it feels so real. But ask them, ask the other person involved, and you'll hear a version that shatters your certainty. Not because they're lying, not because they're twisting it, but because memory is shaped by the emotional lens we wear when we revisit it. And the ego is always wearing its own prescription. It's not just about conflicts, either. The trap shows up in how we remember failure, how we process rejection, how we reflect on risks we didn't take. You'll say, I never really wanted that anyway. Or, I did everything I could. Or, they just didn't see my value. Because that's easier than facing the parts of the story where you hesitated, avoided, ignored your gut. It's easier to rewrite the memory than to sit with the version where you gave up too soon, where you were afraid, where you were wrong. And over time, those rewrites become your reality. Your decisions start to orbit a version of the past that never actually happened. You build narratives based on edited scenes, incomplete scripts, self-protective versions of the truth. And here's the tragedy. It keeps you from real growth. Because you can't learn from a past you've distorted. You can't evolve if your memory keeps painting you as the flawless protagonist. You just repeat patterns. You keep blaming external forces. You stay blind to the lessons that were buried inside the discomfort you've now erased. Now, here's the real twist. We all do it, every one of us. The brain is built to fill in gaps, to smooth out jagged edges. It wants a story that makes sense, one that protects our identity. So this isn't about shame. It's about awareness. You don't have to be perfect. But if you want to grow, you do have to get honest. You have to be willing to doubt your memory. Not in a paranoid way, in a curious one. You have to ask yourself, what might I be leaving out? What truth have I softened over time? What story have I been repeating just to stay comfortable? Sometimes the biggest growth comes when you admit, I might have remembered that wrong. I might have played a bigger role than I wanted to believe. I might not have been the victim there, or the hero, or the innocent bystander. And when you do that, when you stop fighting for the edited version, something opens up. Real accountability, real empathy, real healing. Because now, you're not just defending your past self, you're learning from them. And yeah, it'll sting. Seeing yourself clearly always does, but it's also freeing. Because suddenly, you're not trapped by your story. You're not stuck repeating scenes just to protect your pride. You're allowed to change, to rewrite things again, not to hide, but to grow. So the next time you find yourself saying, I know exactly what happened, pause. Ask yourself, or better yet, ask someone else, do I? Or do I just remember it the way I needed to? Because the truth might be messier. But it's also where your power lies. Not in the version that flatters you, in the version that teaches you.